Clear them out. Clear out. Clear them out. You've got to clear them out. You've got to clear them out as well. There needs to be a new start. Clear them out. Clear out. Clear them out. You've got to clear them out. You've got to clear them out as well. There needs to be a new start. Clear them out. Clear out. Clear them out. You've got to clear them out. You've got to clear them out as well. There needs to be a new start. Clear them out. Clear out. Clear them out. You've got to clear them out. You've got to clear them out as well. There needs to be a new start. Clear them out. Clear out. Clear them out. You've got to clear them out.
I can't make it stop. Okay.
I know. I was thinking.
I made it stop. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of the Flashback Forum. We're rebooting the Flashback Forum. I realise it's been a very, very long time since the last episode we did. I think it was April. So we're going to be doing another Jonathan Bowden speech. I'd kind of been wanting to do this one for a while, but I thought, I don't really want to do 2 episodes of the same guy. But we're just going to do it. So it is what it is. I'm joined today by Tyler White. Welcome, Tyler.
Evening.
How's it going? All good?
Yeah, no, it's going all right. It's a bit late in the evening, but I'm sure we'll stick through right to the end.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there anywhere you want to point people?
Right, yeah. I'm the leader of the National Distributors Party in the UK. We're just finishing up our third year of registration with the Electoral Commission. It's been quite a rocky road, but Vanguardism is one of those things where every social, every sort of speech thing, it's one of those points that I feel we have to hammer home for those of us sort of in the fringes, in the more niche side of the right wing. You can find us on Instagram at National Distributors Party, as well as on Facebook and on Twitter.
Wonderful. And we're also joined by King Maze. Welcome, Aaron.
Yeah, I don't know. I just randomly put that. Yeah, I just want to say, if you happen to, if by some crazy impossibility you happen to live in my direct local area, vote for me in May so I can be elected to council and then defect to national distributor.
Yeah,
Space.
awesome. Yeah, so today, as I said, we're going to be watching another Jonathan Bowden speech. This time it's the Vanguardism speech. I believe the proper name of it is Hope for the Future, but I think most people know it as like the Vanguardism speech. So, yeah, without any further ado, let's get into it. Should be a fun one.
Yeah.
I have to make sure it's not too loud.
His best orator. So put your hands together, please, for Jonathan Bowden. Thanks very much for those warm words of introduction. This is a very difficult topic to speak about because it appears to be a depressing, pessimistic era where most of the storm and stress and most of the zeitgeist or spirit of the age seems to be against us. There's also a preponderance for people on the right, politically, to have metaphysically conservative views, which means they're often pessimistic, they're often loyal to Spencer's idea in the sort of 1920s and 1930s that optimism is a form of cowardice. And in relation to that sort of idea, the notion to be optimistic about the future is difficult to sustain. But given that the past speech was rather sort of statistical and slightly morbid in tone, my job is to not put a reverse spin on it, but at least to attempt to generate some optimistic energy. Now, there are more of us than ever before, but it's always a question of quality as against quantity in this life. Because I think what I'm going to propose is that instead of looking at demographic and quantity-based analyses, quantitative ways of looking at things, let's look at qualitative ways of looking at things. Let's look at quality.
So, yeah, I just want to say, yeah, feel free to obviously interrupt me whenever. Whenever he says something you want to draw attention to. I've just realised that the audio quality on that one's not great. I think this one's better. We'll see.
Because I think what I'm going to propose is that instead of looking at demographic and quantity-based analyses, quantitative ways of looking at things, let's look at qualitative ways of looking at things. Let's look at quality. Let's look at elitism. Let's look at the fact that all groups need a vanguard. I remember once a Times journalist asked me a very long time ago in relation to an event called the Le Pen Dinner, which is now 20 years old and more. He said, "What's your view of all this stuff about revisionism?" He said to me. This was in the hotel in Knightsbridge, Kensington, where the Pen and his guests were situated. He said, "What's your view of all that? Is it all true? Or contrariwise, is it all false?" And I said, thinking of some famous murder trial of the time, I'd use the example of the Wests, Frederick and Rosemary now, but of course this particular discussion predated that. I'd say, well, that trial, is everything that occurred in that court case all true or all false? He said, well, hold on a minute. Some of it's bound to be true and some of it's bound to be false. And I said, well, absolutely. That will go for revisionism as much as anything else. All revisionism is the ultimate defence of a particular vanguard at a particular time who believed that they were fighting for Western civilization. All elites and vanguard minorities is the radical consciousness of their own group. And just as people like Louis Farrakhan were mentioned earlier on, who's the leader of a sect called the Black Muslims, and just as they are in some respects totally unrepresentative of a lot of African American opinion, they nevertheless represent an ultimate readout, an ultimate salient or a bridgehead from which their population can go forth and from which it can gain energy and succor. And that's...
So I think you made an interesting point a second ago about revisionism, historical revisionism, like how history, when can sort of be framed in certain ways that gives it a certain perspective, which can be more or less beneficial for a certain group. And I guess it kind of goes on to like a larger discussion about history of how much of history is actually true, really, and how much of it is just presented in a way that sort of makes sense, and so we believe it. And if you find a way to take certain historical events and portray them in a way which is more favorable to your group, shouldn't you sort of do that? I don't know.
Well, I suppose you have the like if you're like fighting for a particular end goal, then I suppose you have an obligation to try and do that. But you're probably lying or at least exaggerating. Exaggerating your point, like, because you can twist things in so many ways that yeah, I mean, I suppose everyone's going to do that to benefit their own sort of point, aren't they?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I don't know. I was writing earlier about as I've been working on this like big old piece, massive, huge piece about sort of liberalism and the Enlightenment in general, and I was putting forth my sort of narrative of how I think the Enlightenment has sort of played out since its inception and since the French Revolution happened. And it's not like incredibly detailed, right? I'm just sort of giving like a sort of basic narrative of this happened and this happened and that led to this and that led to this. And I said in it, because I know that people are going to say, oh, well, you're missing a bit of nuance here, and well, this was like this. And I just said, look, nuance is all well and good, and it's kind of important, really, but we shouldn't get stuck in nuance too much. Like, if you want to create political change, you just need a convincing story. Now, it's better if that convincing story is true, but it's kind of more important that it's just a convincing narrative. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's not, humans are driven. I think we're
Yeah.
essentially like narrative creatures, right? And Jordan Peterson's spoken about this before. Like we live our lives in a sort of narrative. The way we speak about everything is kind of narrative based as well. Like, what did you do yesterday? Well, first I did this, and then I went here, and that made me feel like this, and that led to this, and But go on, Aaron.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, it was like with the Brexit campaign, like the Leave campaign was all about emotion, about what you see and think, and then the Remain side was all about numbers, statistics, facts, and figures. People don't want to hear facts. Even if it is true, people don't want to hear numbers and statistics. People want to see and feel emotion. And if you can present your kind of point or your story in a way that invokes emotion and strong feeling, rather than just like you can be right, but if you're unconvincing, you might as well be wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's true. I think psychologists have said this. I think Jonathan Haidt said this, that people are not convinced by facts. They're convinced. I'm not sure if it was Jonathan Haidt, but he might have said something similar. But yeah, people are not convinced by facts. They're convinced by these sorts of narratives and the emotions that are stirred up by the things that they hear. Facts are good for putting your case across, but they don't really convince anyone, on their own, at least. Obviously you can use facts as a part of your sort of narrative that you're telling, the case that you're putting across, but nobody is going to see this. There's not this like one fact that people can look at and go, oh shit, yeah, well, you're totally right then. If they've already got the opposing opinion, that is like if they just have no opinion about the subject at all, then maybe it'll work, right? But if they already have the opposing opinion, you won't convince them to change their mind with like one fact.
No. Well, you can't convince someone to change their mind if one person can have a whole sheet full of bullet points of facts, and the other person can have none, but just have a very convincing way of putting their point across, and you just naturally float towards. You don't want to have to think. It's like, oh, that's how I naturally feel, rather than reading a spreadsheet. Do you know what I mean? And like, that's why someone like Nigel Farage will always, whether he's right or wrong, tower over people like Rishi Sunak, like, because people don't want to read spreadsheets. People want to feel something, and whether you're right or wrong is actually secondary to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's the thing as well, is I think part of the reason why, for example, right-wing memes are so much better than left-wing memes is because there is something sort of inherent to like the conservative or more traditional or right-wing side of things, which is just a lot better at sort of narrative, basically, and sort of getting to the point and putting things across in an easy to digest way. So it's funny that we on the right have just consistently lost for like 300 years, right? But obviously part of that is like the long march through the institutions. Leftists have managed to infiltrate institutions and change them from within, and then projects power like that. And that's kind of part of what Bowden goes on to speak about in this speech is, the idea of a vanguard, which is like a small organized minority group, which is able to push for things. Like basically it's an argument against populism. The idea that, oh, if everybody would just wake up, then things would change. A lot of fans of elite theory would say that things never change like that.
I think to pull back to the storytelling, like all successful ideology is effectively a good storytelling. I think you used the broad on the right we have a good narrative, and that's why memes and things are successful. However, I would go a little bit further and say that on either ends of the left and right is a good narrative, like the sort of right, hard sort of right, sensible nationalist side. You have this narrative that your country is what you're fighting for. These are the values you're fighting for, and this is your sort of homeland that you're fighting for. Whereas on the left, you have a pretty good narrative, to be fair, and this is why the communists succeeded in Russia. You have the narrative of these people are oppressing us. These people are taking everything from us and all of the hard work, and they're the fat cats who sit on their wealth, etc. And it's our narrative, it's our story to take them down and get the equality for all in the utopia in the end. Whereas, like, when you get towards the center, like a centrist does not have a good narrative story. The status quo is not a good narrative sort of story. Yeah, that's what I think was quite interesting about the point.
I think you're right. That leftist sort of story is a pretty compelling narrative, right? It's quite emotional, and it is a pretty good call to action. You're right there, and you're also right on the second point about centrism not being sort of something that you can sell. I would say that goes for all of liberalism, just in its totality. Like, I don't. It's really hard to sort of sell liberalism to people in a certain sense.
I think liberalism, when it started, did probably have a decent narrative effect on the working public. You know, like, these are our rights that we have to get. Oh, we need to get our right to vote. We need to get these civil liberties, etc. However, obviously, as it tails off, you know, the more civil liberties you get, the further you have to go. You know this, Matt. You've read Kaczynski. You know the goal, the shifting of the flag, because there's no other goal except from shifting that flag further. So I think the modern narrative for liberalism is terrible, and that's why it's falling away at the corners ever so slightly, more accelerated now, as obviously the narratives are more exposed through the internet on either side of the extremes.
No, that's a good point. I guess it's easy to sell liberalism to people who are serfs, for example. People who are living under sort of fairly restrictive, very hierarchical societies. It'd be quite easy to sell liberalism to them. The problem is, as you say, like, once we get to sort of the current day, how do you continue selling liberalism to people when it's kind of all that they know, and it's so obviously damaging, and you don't really have like feudal lords to sort of fight back against this? You know, like Jonathan Bowden said in the other speech that we looked at, what did they die for? Right, talking about the soldiers in the First World War and the Second World War. What did they die for? Did they die for tolerance and inclusion and diversity and all of this? No, they didn't. They died for their country. They died for what they thought the future would look like if they didn't fight for it. And you know, Carl Schmitt basically makes the same sort of point in the concepts of the political as well. It's you have to have something that you'd be willing to die for, and liberalism doesn't provide that. I think it's a very astute observation. That because I guess if you don't have something that you'd be willing to die for, then sort of what is the point of your life? What is the meaning of it? And liberalism kind of takes that away by dissolving the sort of deep ties that you have to your community, to the land, to your nation, to your people. It breaks up families, breaks up communities, you know. It takes all these things away. So, yeah, let's continue.
That's the way you have to look at these things. People need ultimate resources. They need absolutists, and they need semi-fundamentalists who will stand up for them, at least in a conceptual way, even if they can't stand up for themselves, don't want to, or wouldn't even know how to. And the point of radicals, particularly radicals who deal with the politics of identity in any shape or form, is to provide that elite, is to provide that vanguard. You all know in the technology of a bullet, that a bullet is very significant in the impact it can have on a wall, or a piece of wood, or force the human body. But if a bullet is perforated at the top, or has mercury injected into the top and is sealed in again, it becomes a far more devastating weapon. It becomes what's known as a dum-dum bullet. Now, if a Vanguard is to have the effect of such retreated bullets, so that conceptually and actuarially the energy and vigour of debate is transformed by the use of such a Vanguard and its terminology, it has to be aware of where it's coming from, what its tradition is, where it's going to, and what it represents at a particular time. Just because most of the politics of this era seems to be running well and truly against us does not mean that the situation is hopeless, because situations are never hopeless. Groups that have been done down or perceive that they've been done down by history have undergone worse traumas than we are undergoing at the present time. The danger of the ideology of the victim, which I don't really subscribe to, except as...
So I thought that was quite interesting. He doesn't say the words Overton window there, but I think that's essentially what he's getting at, right? For any sort of movement or any ideology, you have to have like a very extremist end of it, which is constantly working to push the Overton window further in that direction. So, I mean, Nigel Farage is obviously not an extremist, right? But when he first came back, he did a very good job of pushing the Overton window by being like a prominent voice who was willing to speak about things that you sort of weren't really allowed to speak about. And since he did that, it's now become much more acceptable to talk about, you know, the impacts of immigration and so on, and even to bring up the prospect of deporting people. Farage obviously only really talks about illegals, but even the idea of being able to speak about deporting people who came here legally is sort of not acceptable, but it's not as unacceptable as it was before. I don't know.
You've actually just made me realise that about 10 years ago, talking about a mass deportation is just unheard of. Whereas now, if you say something like that, you're probably getting a bit closer to it being a bit more acceptable, just because whether Farage wants that or not, through his, a discourse of being, on the borderline of acceptable, he's actually pushed that borderline of acceptability further towards the right. So, if in his mind he's all the way over here on the right, but in public he's just here, he's slowly pushing us there, if I'm explaining that well.
And that's the Overton window sort of in a nutshell. And this, what Bowden is speaking about here, I think is why it's quite good. He's kind of like Marmite. People either love him or hate him, but it's good that we have people like, for example, Steve Laws, who's always on Twitter going on about remigration. Like his catchphrase is like, remigration is inevitable. People like him, some people may say that he's extreme, but I think it's good that we have these kind of people because they do push the conversation. They do broaden the sort of the boundaries of what is acceptable to say. And that's essential.
But yeah, so as you say, how like just going back to the Farage example, so he needs somebody else that's on the extreme right to help him push the Overton window that way. But I can't think who the person on the extreme right is. Like, who is that, do you think? Someone like Katie Hopkins or someone like that?
No, definitely not. Do you mean in terms of like actual politicians or just like public life?
Yeah, I mean, anybody really that can affect the kind of politics. You don't have to be a politician, but yeah, I mean, anybody really. What do you think?
I would say like I think Homeland Party, although they're not terribly well known, they do an all right job of it. Some people think this is controversial because I've seen them getting a lot of flack recently, but like the Lotus Eaters, for example, they're always going on about how Farage needs to step up. He's not being strong enough. And these kind of things, these kind of things, slowly over time, steadily do sort of push things in a rightward direction. If you come out and say, look, our foremost sort of quote unquote right wing representative is being too soft, people will look at that and say, yeah, he is being a bit soft. Yeah, like that's true, you know, and it, as I say, it broadens the boundaries of what's acceptable to say and to not say. So Homeland doing all right job. Steve Laws on Twitter does a good job. He's got about 60,000 followers, so he does a good job.
Right. It actually, I don't know. It's just making so much sense to me. So say you got Farage and the Lotus Eaters. Farage can't. It's similar to the. It's like tiptoeing in a way. Like Farage can't come out and just say all these things because he'll be discarded as some kind of extremist. But if he's there in the public eye, going as far as he acceptably can, and you've got people like the Lotus Eaters saying, no, we should be doing this, you should be doing this. Slowly, they are making it more and more acceptable for him to go further. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's what that makes sense to me.
Yeah, we're pushing the Overton window rightwards.
Yeah. So in a year's time, he now can say what he wanted to say in the first place, but he couldn't say it because the Overton window hadn't been pushed that far yet.
Yeah, because you know, like I said a few minutes ago, it's like at a certain point in time, you know, a few years ago, you could get away with saying like we need to deport all the illegals, right? And the average person would agree with you, but you couldn't say it on television, right? You couldn't say it on BBC. You couldn't say it on Question Time. Now you could absolutely say that, and it wouldn't be a problem at all. Now you couldn't say we should also be deporting people who came here legally on BBC or Question Time or Sky News or whatever. But you won't be arrested if you say it on Twitter. You won't have, I mean, you probably never would have been arrested for it, but you certainly would have had the police turn up at your door at a certain point in time if you had said that kind of thing. And now, in certain spheres at least, on Twitter, for example, Elon Musk's Twitter, you can get away with saying things like that. Totally fine. So I think, you know, Farage has done a good job broadening the Overton window a bit. He's been too soft recently, though, man. Far too soft recently. He needs to sort it out. That Rupert Lowe's been doing all right, though. He's been saying some pretty good things recently. And we just have to keep it up. We just have to keep it up. So what Bowden here is saying, I think is good, right? I think he'll go on to talk about it in a minute, but I'm not sure if he's already spoken about it. But he was talking about the black Muslims of the Nation of Islam. And he was saying, you know, in a sense, they're totally unrepresentative of what the average African American thinks. But by being so extreme and doing what they do kind of help black Americans in a certain sense by making the things that they do actually want seem less extreme compared to what they're saying. Yeah. So anyway, we'll continue. As I said, feel free to just tell me to pause whenever he says something that you want to comment on.
On occasion, is that you begin to think like a victim and you begin to act like a victim. Many of our people now are almost asking for a whipping, asking for a collective beating.
I think that sense has gone. I think that is like, oh, we're asking for a whipping is like very 2011. I think, even though I don't think it's the right way to go about things, the Southport riots and things, and general populism on the rise in Europe and now also in the UK has shown that actually we're past that point. We've stepped over that point of being almost meek in the face of almost oppression in a way in how the government treats its citizens when it comes to issues of this nature. So I think that point's redundant on, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think it's always good to keep it in mind, though, is that we cannot fall back into the victim mindset. And to be fair, I do still see people doing this today, right? Like using the sort of left-wing arguments, but just sort of substituting the people that you're talking about. You know, people I mean, even to an extent, I know I'm not sort of saying it was a bad tactic or whatever, but the kind of two-tier policing and that sort of thing, it does kind of put ourselves in like the victim position, right? We're being oppressed by the justice system. The government hates white people. Like, it's obviously true, and it's good to point it out, but we do also have to be mindful that we don't make ourselves into victims, because then we are almost, in a sense, as Bowden says here, asking for a whipping. Like, don't sit there and talk about, oh, it's so unfair that this is happening. No, just do something about it. You know.
What if the roles were reversed though?
In what sense?
It's the common phrase of
Right, yes, yeah.
Oh, imagine if the roles were reversed. Yeah, that's basically what it is the mentality that has basically failed throughout the 2010s, really, and it's a stupid conservative tactic anyway. And
absolutely.
I'm glad it's been put in the dustbin. But that was definitely asking for a whipping. If it could be boiled down into a sentence or a phrase, it is what if the roles were reversed?
No, that's very good point. Very good point. Yep.
Collective beating, asking to be forgiven for the past, asking to be forgiven for sins and crimes of the past, which they never committed, which they're hardly aware of, which could be reconstrued as episodes of heroic cruelty or glorious vanguardism that don't even need to be apologised for in the past or in the present. And so there's a degree to which I personally think that the doctrine of vanguardism is the way out of the dilemma that we face. All communist movements believe that the proletariat needed to be saved from itself. They believe that the masses were degraded by feudalism and by capitalism. They believe that only an elite or a vanguard party could raise the masses up to socialism as the inverse of the capitalism they wish to replace. All communist movements that flourished in Western and other societies throughout most of the late 19th and 20th centuries based themselves on the vanguard principle. These movements were tiny, smaller than the number of people gathered in this room in central West London tonight, by a long way. When people include, I've got a book about literature at the moment on my desk, and in order to tabulate historical reliefs for literary points, they give the listing of events in particular years. And in one particular year, I'm not sure, it might be 1912, it talks about the Bolshevik and Menshevik split. It may have been in that year, it may have been in another year. That split happened in London. It happened in a pub in London. And all Bolsheviki and Mensheviki means is majority and minority. And there was a split between the two of them. And you can imagine them all with their beards and so on, haranguing each other and debating about whether there should be an instantaneous rising in Russia or whether they should wait for historical process to take its course, because Russia was not yet a capitalist society with a bourgeois class that could be overthrown, and so on. The majority of Londoners, even from the ethnic groups that a significant proportion of those communists were drawn from, would regard that as idiocy and lunacy, just as the bulk of white people today regard a significant amount of what we say as lunacy. All people who have a vanguard and elitist mentality are regarded as partly mad by their own groups, because the majority of people do not want to know. The majority of people wish to live their own life in their own way, and they only look at these broader questions when life impinges upon them and comes upon them, and the hand of life grasps them by the collar, and they really cannot do any other thing but notice what is in front of them. Many of the reasons our people do not seem to have a sense of solidarity amongst themselves in relation to the degree that some of the groups could be said to have is because a significant number of them have never been kicked, have never felt what it is as a group to be disprivileged in a society. Unfortunately, in certain areas of British and continental life now, and North American life, that process for some, and certainly not at the top or at the middle of the society, is beginning. They're beginning to realise what it's like to be a minority.
So, yeah, what he was talking about there is like classic elite theory, which is you know, the only way that anything ever gets done is if an organized minority gets together and makes it happen. So it's this very kind of anti-pop, like, I mean, it's literally the opposite of like the populist belief that if we just wake enough people up, then everything will change. The problem is with populism, I do think populism is useful for sort of pushing the Overton window, like we were talking about. It can be very useful for that, but it doesn't create real change in the way that sort of vanguard groups can, organized minorities can. I've got a quote here from Gaetano Mosca, who wrote a book called The Ruling Class. I'll just throw it up on screen. In reality, the dominion of an organized minority obeying a single impulse over the unorganized majority is inevitable. The power of any minority is irresistible as against each single individual in the majority who stands alone before the totality of the organized minority. So you see what I'm saying there, right? If you have a minority group which is organized, going up against a disorganized majority group, the way it basically works out is the individuals in that majority stand against the organized minority as an individual, whereas the organized minority has that sort of quality of solidity, right? 100 men acting uniformly in concert with a common understanding will triumph over 1,000 men who are not in accord and can therefore be dealt with one by one. Meanwhile, it will be easier for the former to act in concert and have a mutual understanding, simply because they are 100 and not 1,000. It follows that the larger the political community, the smaller will the proportion of growing minority to the governing majority be, the more difficult will it be for the majority to organize a reaction against the minority. I think it's very interesting. I think there's a lot of truth to it as well, especially the last point about the larger a political community is, like the nation, for example. The smaller, actually, the smaller the proportion of the organized minority will be. I think it's, yeah, I mean, it's very insightful, and so I guess the sort of overarching point that I'm making here is we kind of have to get away from this idea that everybody seems to have of we just have to wake enough people up. If we could just wake enough people up, then change will happen overnight. You know, it's not true. It's not true, because we are a disorganized majority, right? And because the right wing, like the actual right wing, not sort of conservatives or whatever, is an actual threat to those who are in power. They put a lot of energy and resources into making sure that there can be no proper right-wing organization, because if you try to organize on the right, you'll be shut down. You'll be clamped down upon. But people need to do it. It has to be done, because otherwise nothing will ever change. Or at least nothing will ever change in our favor.
The benefit that a vanguard has over like a populist, so we'll use Reform UK as an example, is Reform UK obviously sort of just came into being pretty much only last year when Nigel came back. Like that's like the Tice years, just disavow those. Like they just should be disregarded entirely. But what a vanguard has is like Bowden says, it has a structure to it, and that hierarchy will be like very detailed. So in those 40 communists in London, you'll have the leader, who would be either Lenin, Marx, etc., and then he would have his like shadow secretary for like transport, shadow secretary of foreign affairs. And even though they're only in a pub in London and they're pretty much just wargaming it out with each other and discussing, there'll be a pub of 40 people and you'll be discussing, oh, when we're in power. So you have this group, this organic group of grassroots people who are completely committed and are discussing the ideas of what you're going to do on your first day. Whereas the populist parties, they have their one leader who controls pretty much all the rhetoric. And that's the problem with Reform UK at the minute. Nigel controls the rhetoric. Any MPs who go outside of that, so like Rupert Lowe and also Ben Habib, who isn't an MP, they will be pushed aside because it goes against the central figure of the populist movement.
Well, you just have to look at how many candidates were deselected by Reform in the run-up to the election. Like, for example, Bowden, Dan Tubb, for saying things which were not terribly controversial, really, and which are now basically part of Reform's sort of manifesto pledges. But they were pushed out for being seen as basically too extreme or too dangerous at the time. And yeah, so yeah, just to sort of echo your point. Yeah, but yeah, you say, and Bowden was saying about, you know, this group of communists in the pub in London. Even if there's only 40 of them, if they are all absolutely committed, and if they're all, as you say, wargaming it together, they will possess this quality of solidity that a sort of populist movement couldn't. And by virtue of that, they will have a massive advantage if they have to go against the disorganized mass. And you just have to look at any revolution in history, right? Any regime change that has occurred throughout history. I mean, not one of them has been just enough people woke up and so it changed. There was always an elite group leading it, or just doing it in its entirety, all of it. Right? I had an argument with a family member about the French Revolution, and he was saying, you know, they were like the original sort of anarchists. You know, they decided they'd had enough and they did something about it. I was like, no, not really. The peasants had almost nothing to do with it. It was the bourgeoisie. It was the organized minority of the bourgeois class that had a problem with the nobility and the clergy and the monarchy, and got together and ousted them. And the peasantry and the rest of the Frenchmen fell in line, but it wasn't caused by the average man on the street. Not at all. The French Revolution was a bourgeois revolution, as all revolutions are. Anyway, let's continue.
Or what it's like to be privileged, what it's like to be dispossessed in a way. Now, that spirit will grow, but it will only feed into consciousness in a number of select minds, because the bulk of people are not drawn to be in a vanguard formulation. People will only listen to a vanguard when they are desperate. They will only listen to a vanguard when they think there is no other hope. They would love many of the problems of contemporary Britain, many which revolve around the processes of immigration, to be solved. But they would love to have nothing to do with it themselves, and they would love that somebody came forward magically without trouble and without fuss to deal with it on their behalf. They want no unpleasantness, and they want no nastiness, particularly in their own name. But at the same time, if somebody does things of any sort that could be ascribed to that, they would run away and hide initially, be privately pleased, condemn the people who did it, support the people who were against them, and yet at the same time have a secret smirk and smile on their face about the whole thing. And they would do all of that simultaneously. And that's what people...
I think that's really interesting. All the stuff he was just saying there, you know, the people who are represented by the Vanguard group would kind of probably actually be against them because they would view them as, you know, too extreme and so on. But when they saw the group doing things that actually were in their interests and actually did improve their lives, they would kind of have this cognitive dissonance of like, oh, these guys are extreme, but actually what they're doing is kind of working, you know, it is actually in my interests. I feel like a lot of the British public, if you did get a group in who started kicking out a bunch of people, would sort of feel bad about it, but then and sort of push against it as well. Oh, you can't do that. That's wrong. That's too far. That's extreme. You know, that's nasty. But at the same time, in the same moment, they would have this kind of thing in the back of their head, like actually, like there were too many foreigners here, though. You know, actually getting rid of them is actually pretty good. Like it is actually quite helpful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. But the problem with politics mainly is that it's a team game, and if the other team is saying something that you like and your team aren't saying it, you can't say that. You always have to stick with whatever the narrative is, and especially with members of parliament, like their first priority is themselves. They want to keep their seat. They want to stay in power, and so they will do what and say what they need to in order to stay an MP, have an easy life. I think they're actually mainly concerned with themselves, really, most of them, over the narrative or and discourse in the country. I feel like with 90% of them, as long as they can keep their seat, they'll go along with it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem of liberalism, sort of in general, and I mean not just liberalism. You can't blame it solely on that. There's also a bit of just the human condition in there, but it's exacerbated by liberalism. Is the fact that I feel like a lot of MPs, probably the majority, are very self-serving. Don't actually really care that much about their constituents. They just because you have to think like what kind of person you have to be to become an MP, right? There are only 650 MPs in the country. I mean, what is that as a percentage of the population, right? 0.001%, something like that. So what kind of person do you have to be to become an MP? You have to have a real craving for power. You have to be very good at organization. You have to, I feel like to get up quite high in politics, you have to, at some level, be something of a narcissist, right? And so the game of parliamentary politics is kind of set up in a way that you end up with a certain type of person at the top, and that certain type of person at the top probably isn't going to actually be the best person for the job. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I was I can't remember who it was, but I was watching some interviews that somebody was doing. Somebody that stood for a US election a while ago. I can't remember who now, but he said, "Oh, somebody told me that they don't think I'm actually suitable for this job, that maybe I'm not good enough to do it." And I said, "I don't have to be the best person in the country to do it. I have to be the best person running to do it." And that was like, it was like somebody said I'm unfit to be president. He was like, "Yeah, like I don't have to be the most fit for president. I have to be the most fit person running for it." And that was like, wow, like that is so true.
It is true. Yeah, it's true. It's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah.
Initially, be privately pleased, condemn the people who did it, support the people who were against them, and yet at the same time have a secret smirk and smile on their face about the whole thing, and they would do all of that simultaneously.
But you are right, Aaron. Sorry, you are right about sort of politics as like a team game, as you said. Like it's very tribal, and I understand why, but it is kind of annoying how you could have, for example, there could be a Labour MP who comes out tomorrow and says something that I 100% agree with. Now, I personally would have no problem with saying, yeah, good point. You know, it's weird to see it coming from this particular guy, but yeah, that's a good point. But most people, I think, couldn't say that, and especially people who are like at all, even tangentially involved in politics, wouldn't feel like they would be able to say that. And I guess that's part of the benefit of me having no interest in actually getting into politics, is that I do sort of have the freedom to not abide by the sort of tribalism that I guess a lot of others would. I mean, you two are both involved in politics, like actual politics. Do you feel like there are things that you can't say, or just like the example that I said about a Labour MP? Like, if a Labour MP said something that you totally agreed with, would you feel like, I probably shouldn't like tweet saying that that's a fair point or whatever?
I was going to say, like, at our like selection meeting, like probably 2 months ago now, or whenever it was, I can't remember. There was one guy there who was running for something, and he was doing his speech, and he was saying, "Oh, there was this issue that I helped sort out. I put it through to the Labour MP for the area, and he actually did a good job with it." And everyone in the room immediately dismissed it. Like, we didn't care whether the Labour MP actually did a good job or not. Like, the guy was immediately dismissed with that point. Everyone just started laughing, like, "Oh, the other team couldn't possibly do something good. What are you talking about? You must be joking." And that was the initial reaction from the room. And this is some small council level. This is nothing significant for the country, and it even happens here at every level. It's like that. It's a completely us versus them tribal thing. You cannot, there's no nuance. It's either us or them 100% on all of the issues.
In my personal experience, being a parish councillor as well sort of comes into this, although it's non-political, the parish council, where distributism is quite a classically central sort of thing. The whole point of it is the different bits of ideology are put into one ideology, which is supposed to be like the best, in a very dumbed down explanation of it. So it's like when the Labour councillor goes, let's spend some money on the roads because we need good infrastructure, whereas maybe a Conservative viewpoint would be, no, let's reduce taxes or something. You can agree with both sides, so there's no disagreement. It's trying to find that middle way. So I find that in terms of tribalism, for me, it's not as bad as what you've just said, Mr. Mays. But I take it you're running for reform, aren't you?
In an alternative reality, possibly, but yeah, no, I'm running for Conservatives.
Right, yeah. I can see why there would be that tribalism, but it should definitely come down, like in local elections, for example, like the last local elections that came through, I voted Green and Labour because I know that my Labour councillor is really good, and I know that my Green councillor is actually all right as well, and obviously shares a bit of the more ecological sides of my viewpoint, whereas I obviously wouldn't agree with them on a social level, which is why in national elections I voted Reform, because I put the social policy first on a national level, and like the sort of smaller, less urgent beliefs I put into local level, and that influences my voting there. It's not just like one faction is what I'm going with. It's you've got to work with everyone, I think.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add in as well that this tribalism, in my experience, is only Conservatives versus Labour. And when we're talking about reform and we're saying, "Oh, we agree with this and that," everybody pretty much agrees. Everyone's like, "Yeah, we should be doing what Reform are doing," and everyone unanimously agrees there. And the whole, "No, they can't be right. They're always wrong about everything." That's only when we're talking about Labour. Pretty much, it isn't even so much with the Lib Dems or Green either. It's literally just Labour. Like, they must always be wrong.
I guess that makes sense, like in a sort of de facto two-party system. Yeah, but yeah, it's interesting what you said, Tyler, about sort of as a distributist. I guess because as a distributist, you're looking at politics from, and I mean, I'm a distributist too, so I totally feel you. You're looking at politics from the outside in a certain sense, because we understand that distributism as an ideology is not really on the cards. But because there are aspects of it which, for example, the Labour Party might share, and there are aspects of it which, for example, the Conservative Party might share, I guess it does give us that kind of perspective where we can look at individual actions that they take and be like, yeah, no, good, nice one, that sort of thing. I had a second point. And I've lost it. Yes, what I wanted to say. I think one thing about tribalism, right, is imagine, right, I guess we all probably hate Labour more than any other party, so we'll go with Labour for the example. Imagine if the Labour Party tomorrow just suddenly started doing all the things that you wanted to see happen. I feel like a lot of people would have this weird cognitive dissonance of they're doing everything exactly the way I would like to see it happen, but it's Labour, so I can't support it because it's Labour. And I think
I wouldn't believe it.
Well, I would look at it with a lot of skepticism, right? Like, what's the catch? I'm going to keep an eye on this and find out what the catch is. But if it continued, week after week, month after month, at some point I'd be like, well, right then, fair enough. I guess I support Labour since they're doing everything that I want to see happen. I guess I support them now.
I think so, yes, but that time for me would probably be at least a year or maybe a parliamentary term. I just wanted to add onto the last point about like the reason why it's such a tribal game and you can't say anything that the Labour guy did is because if the Labour guy, the MP, comes out now and does this amazing thing, and I then go on Facebook saying, do you know what, mate, that was an amazing thing, and I influence 2 voters to vote for him, and they decide that seat in the election, and that seat then decides the entire general election. Like obviously it wouldn't be that close, but if it was, that's why you can't, because you could be influencing other people to vote for them because this guy did one good thing. So everything's tied, like, yeah. And I think that's just the way the system's set up. Like it naturally forces you to do that.
And that's what people are like. And that's what our own people are like up to a point. And that's the funk and the state of internal confusion and bemusement that our people are in. Because every time they turn on the box in the corner, it says everything is marvellous and is all for the best, and that there is no need to worry, and that we're all sleepwalking towards victory. I read 1984 again recently, so a good quarter of a century since I read that book. And it's a remarkably prescient work in every sense. Of course, it's a social democratic criticism of Stalinist authoritarianism. But in actual fact, Orwell's idea that everyone polices their thoughts before they speak, they even police the idea of their thoughts before they speak, is very germane to the present hour. I was with a relative of mine many years ago, and we were in a wood near Liverpool on our own, and he looked behind him before he made a politically incorrect remark. Because he was worried. He was worried to be alone in a wood with someone else. And if you remember, in the second section of 1984, Julia and Winston have their rather tawdry affair, it has to be said in a way, against the party, sort of sexist rebellion against the Puritanism of Newspeak and all that. And they go into the middle of a wood, and they go into the middle of a clearing of saplings in order to get down to it. And the reason that they do that is, one, of course, is because it's not in an urban area, and therefore there are no telescreens.
Sorry, my mic was muted. Aaron, have you read 1984?
No, I've been meaning to for such a long time, but I haven't now.
Oh, you should. I won't even ask Tyler because I know it will be a yes. So, classic. It's a classic, man. Yeah, you have to.
And it's pretty much it just predicts everything that's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, man.
these televisions that can look both ways, with the secret police, the thought police behind them. And on the other hand, there are no microphones, because wherever there isn't a telescreen, you can never vouchsafe that there isn't a microphone in that particular novel listening to you. And people are policed now by political correctness, which they adhere to, and which they go along with, and which they profess to love, whilst at the same time hating and despising, looking over their shoulder as they refute it and rebut it in the context of their own life. Because that's what the majority is always like. The majority is confused and inane and believes in the last thing that's ever said to them. Of course, in all societies, you have a hierarchy of knowledge and understanding. Probably about 40% of people are quite politically proficient, know what's what, vote to a certain degree, have a cynical regard for the system as it is, at least are compos mentis about the sort of culture and society they're living in. But a good 60% are not. There's a famous story about a Labour member of Parliament.
What do you reckon? 60% of people know absolutely nothing about politics.
Oh, did you see the recent
I
polls
could
that came
believe
out
that.
from YouGov?
Sorry, Tyler, say again.
Did you see the recent polls that came out by YouGov,
I did not.
explaining like what each so the basic setup is, you know, it would be like what percentage of the Green Party supports environmentalism, and then it would be like 79% of the Green Party believes in
Oh, I think,
environmentalism.
yes, I did
What
hear
are those
about
other
this.
11 and 21% people like doing?
I did hear about this because didn't like 20% of Tories say that they support socialism or something ridiculous like that? Yeah.
So that
Mental.
was like, because that only came out like this week, and I think that is like the definitive proof that like the majority of people just are either way too well politically educated to the point where you get people who are like, oh yes, I'm a classical Marxist with conservative leanings, and you know we have to go through the conservative route in order to achieve final proletariat dominance. And then you have like the other end of the spectrum where it's like, blue. I like the color blue. Like,
Yeah. What do you reckon, Aaron? 60% of people know absolutely nothing about politics.
Well, actually, the thing is, I can't talk for like areas that are like just intellectually different, but like where I grew up and the people that I grew up around, I never met a single person ever until my adulthood that was interested in politics or that I spoke to or had a conversation with at all about politics. Like, I grew up my entire life up until pretty much the age of 18. I never knew there was local elections. I never knew councillors were elected. I never knew what the different parties stood for and what their general history is. I never knew the name of the current prime minister. Like nothing. Like politics just wasn't a thing. And I feel like it's the same for a lot of people. But 60% sounds like a high number. But yeah, possibly. I mean,
I reckon 60% is probably slightly low, man. I reckon a good,
well,
like,
I mean, to not have a single
70-ish.
clue about politics at all.
Good 70-ish%, yeah.
I don't know. It sounds high.
Proved by turnout rates, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, the things with the turnout rate is that a lot of people who turn out will have basically no idea what they're actually voting for. They just vote Labour because my dad voted Labour or whatever, you know. Won't actually really have a clue kind of what it's about. And I mean, obviously, it depends on how you define like having a clue and so on. But I think it would be fair to say, like, if you had 10 random people in a room, 7 of them would basically not really know like much more than like the absolute basics.
Do you know what? I never even met anybody that knew the absolute basics. I specifically remember when my interest in politics was completely sparked by the Brexit vote. I went into work that one day, everyone was going on about it. I was like, right, what's this? Let me search it up. And the rest is history. I went home and like told my mum and brother and her partner at the time all about it, and they all just looked at me like, what are you talking about? Oh, shut up. They're completely oblivious. Like the government could be collapsing in front of their eyes and they wouldn't notice. It's nuts.
I respect that in a way. I would love to just not give a shit about politics at all, but I just can't not give a shit about politics at all.
No, but like, not giving a shit just because nobody ever comes across your path talking about it. You'd never hear about it, fine. But I'm in your face telling you that a monumental event has just happened. And you're like, you know, you're literally more interested in if the bread's selling date. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I respect it. I honestly respect it, to be fair. Because I think I've said this before, I think it's actually really cruel to bring about a situation where more and more people, have to get involved in politics and have to care about it. Because I don't think they should have to. They should be able to just live their lives without worrying about all of this shit. Because we should just have competent government that just runs things in the national interest. Right? And when you have shit governments consistently, decade after decade, that just keep making everything worse, and people have to care about what the government's up to and have to sort of try to keep up to date and have to get pissed off about the things that they're watching happening around them, I think that's cruel, to be honest.
Problem is though, if too many people are allowed to not care, then the vanguards will take over.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's a good thing as long as the Vanguard is sort of doing it for the right reasons. I think that's part of the problem, really, is that we've been ruled by an organised minority which seems to despise us. So that's part of the sort of fundamental issue that I have with democracy, really, is that it kind of incentivizes people to care about politics when I don't think they should.
No, I think you're correct. Like even in terms of like a long lifespan or whatever, next year or 2026 will be like the marking of like year 10 of me having like an interest in politics. Like 2016 was when I started getting involved with UKIP and everything. And I've got to say, nowadays I'm just burnt out with it. Like, like I've been thinking that I need to go away somewhere else for a few years, perhaps like just 1 or 2 years, just like in the complete like wilderness where I don't even get a newspaper or an internet signal, and I can just like work away, and I can just think about something that isn't politics for a change. And it would probably be a really, really healthy thing for me to do, and making the average person who perhaps like it might take more effort to understand like politics and things for them because they haven't gone down the educational route from the get-go. I think you're right, that is quite a cruel thing to make them have to like pay attention almost. Because you can do politics passively where you agree with a certain set of principles and you can just go and vote. And that's just how it's been up until like the 50s or whatever, because that's when suffrage really came in and made people really start going out and thinking and getting a bit more tribal, etc., etc. But yeah, I think what's happened is during Brexit or whatever, people's participation in politics went up, and it was such an exhausting process that it's probably one of the leading factors, apart from just disinterest, of why turnout rates were so low in the last election. I think people are just like politics out almost, like they don't want to listen anymore, but they're forced to because of how horrendous our governments are.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely true. Couldn't have put it any better. Like, I think for me, like I'm more interested in politics when things are going my way. The party that I support is in power. Like right now would be a perfect time for me to just not care about politics. But I don't know, I just can't help it. You have a natural kind of attachment to these things. Like it's kind of like football if you're a football fan or whatever it is that you follow. You can't help but ignore it. And even if you do ignore it, you're going to hear about it somewhere, or it's going to pop up on your phone somewhere or something. Like once you're entrenched, you're kind of you've kind of dug yourself a grave that you can't climb out of.
I think genuinely though, like the point of recognition that your like interest has gone way too far is when you start like watching politics in like Singapore and stuff like if you're watching politics that isn't like in like I don't pay attention to like American politics or like stuff on the continent because I just don't care. It has no effect on me whatsoever. There's nothing I can do to go like, oh, I'll change the minds of people in America. So it's like there's no point even filling your brain with it. Like if you're interested in politics, I really think you should just concentrate on like literally your local area and what you can do to affect your local area. And you get these people on Twitter mostly who will celebrate like some random nationalist in like Malaysia or something and be like, yeah, another victory, and it's like not really because they're literally across the other side of the world.
So fucking true though.
It is, isn't it? Just like
Yeah. So, the far right are on the rise in southern New Zealand. Like, oh, right, really?
yeah, oh no, they got one town council in
Yeah.
Nairobi. Oh fuck, guys, fourth Reich's here, fucking out like.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's so true though. But this kind of like goes back to what Matt was saying earlier about like to be the sort of person to get interested in politics, you have to have a craving for power, and I think to a degree that is completely true because there is not a single person. I mean, I don't know that of the people that I've met, they've all got higher ambitions. All of them do. Like, all of them want to be the MP or they want to try and be the leader of the council. None of them are there because they genuinely care about Maureen down the road and her bin problem. Like, all of them are, they want higher things, and they're all just trying to be on the gravy train for when that opportunity comes. Like, and you can just tell that from everyone.
Yeah.
I think every MP has a secret ambition to be PM one day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why would you? To be fair, you'd be wrong if you didn't.
Kind of, I guess. Yeah. I don't think it should
Absolutely.
be like
Why?
that.
Why
But
would
yeah.
you? Why would you want to walk right up to the line and not cross it when you're one of a few that even gets to see the line? You know.
I suppose so. But yeah, on
Like,
the
I want to
point
make
about
everything better for my. Sorry, I want to make everything better for my local community and my general area, but not quite the country. Like,
well, I think that's a good thing about you two. I wish more people were like you two. Is you're both very centered on your actual local area. Like Aaron, I know you're very passionate about the bins. Tyler, I know you do like litter picking and like
I focus
support for like
on
homeless
the
people and
local level.
stuff.
Yeah, on the local level, what I try to do with the meager amount of power that I have is like environmental stuff mainly, but using like the party as a vessel for charity, you can do a lot more like helping the homeless and supporting food banks and the like.
Yeah. I was just gonna say you guys had a food bank drive recently, didn't you? How much did you end up raising? £310.
It was £310 in total, yeah. So that was a really good campaign set up by one of our like top guys, top members. He is like the distributist. He's like a carpenter, absolutely like jacked, and like just farms his own stuff. He's absolutely great. I met him in Preston last week, and he was a really nice guy. Really salt of the earth.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. It's brilliant, and all of that stuff was brought from local farmers as well, right?
Yes, it was bought from local farms, and I think like the honey was bought from just someone selling it like in the local area. You just get the people who just have a sign on their door, don't they, saying like honey pot's £5.
Yeah.
But it was mostly from farmers or wholesalers that are directly from local farmers. I don't know the exact details, but I know that the general practices, it did all come from the local area.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. It's such a great idea as well, because it has that like double positive effect of you're like helping out local farmers by buying stuff from them, but then donating it to a food bank. Like, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I mean, before that campaign, I didn't even know that fresh food banks were a thing. I just thought it was always just canned goods and pasta.
Mm. You'd think so, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd think so. Yeah, no, brilliant.
Who went to a constituent's door. He was Dennis Potter, the playwright, who later emerged on the BBC. And he was a Labour candidate in his earlier vintage. And he'd knock on the door, and the woman and the husband would come to the door, and the woman would say, well, what are you going to do about immigration then? As a Labour candidate, as our candidate, as the candidate who will speak to the truth to us, unlike the Tories. No understanding, of course, that Labour is a centre-left party that believes in mass migration as a doctrine of law and morality, and whose Nationality Act of 1948 began the modern-day process of complete societal transformation, because, as Attlee said at the time, if the races of this world have mixed together, there will be no more war. And that is an ideology which many of the old Labourites believed in, body and soul, from the anti-colonial movement from which they came. But the bulk of Labour voters thought that Labour stood for something quite different from that. They thought Labour stood for them and for their family and for their extended family and people who weren't like the people who lived on the posher estate down the way who voted for another party. That's what they thought. But Potter had to answer this woman and her husband as they stood before him. And he said, well, what do you mean? Labour is in favour of fairness for all. A politician's answer, of course, even on the doorstep. And she said, oh, but there's too many, and they're taking over the centre of town, and I don't feel safe anymore, and things have changed out of all recognition. And some of what that chap Enoch Powell says, I don't like him because he's a Tory, but at the same time, it's got some truth to it. And all the time, Potter was wanting to reply. He was wanting to reply that you're a bigot, I don't want your vote. I don't want it, even if you're prepared to give it to me under other circumstances where you said you repudiated what you just said. And all the time, his agent was kicking him, was kicking the back of his heels, as if to say, come on, there's plenty of other doors, there's plenty more to do, Dennis, there's plenty to get the sort of the red ribbon vote out. Let's leave them to themselves. They'll probably vote Labour anyway, as indeed they will. And he kept kicking him and so on. And in the end, Potter said, Labour's in fairness of all, but of course, we'll listen to your concerns, madam. We'll listen to your concerns. And as he was turning away from the agent said, and what will it be then? To the husband, who'd obviously not really got a word in beforehand. And the husband said, oh yeah, we'll vote Labour as normal, because you listen to what we say. And that is, and they're not alone, because there's millions like that, millions and millions like that.
I think it's a very good point how, historically, of course, the Labour Party was seen as like the party for like the common man, for the worker. I mean, that's why it's called the Labour Party, right? Obviously. But the sort of average man on the street, average like working class guy, has views which would be perceived by the Labour Party of today as being disgusting, xenophobic, racist, bigoted views. So the Labour Party at some point became the party of the sort of sneering middle classes. And the Conservatives have obviously kind of always been the party of the sneering middle classes. And so, the working class doesn't really have any proper representation anymore. I think you can see a really good example of this in, for example, like the Just Stop Oil protests, where who was it who was dragging these protesters out of the roads? It was the working class guys in their white vans, right? So, and this has always been a problem for socialists in general, I would say, is that the biggest enemy of the socialist revolution has always actually been the working classes themselves, because they don't want it, because they're instinctively quite conservative people. They just want to get on with it and have a family and make enough money to get by. and not have to watch their areas be demographically changed by politicians. I don't know. Charlie, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Is my mic working fine?
Yep. Sounds good. We're watching
Brilliant.
Jonathan Bowden's Vanguardism speech. We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes, and you've only missed 15 minutes of the actual speech, so not so bad. Continue.
Politicians will sort it out. Politicians left to themselves will do something to make sure that things won't get as bad as they could be. The other thing you often hear about is death. People say, it's not going to happen while I'm around, therefore I don't need to bother about it. I've heard lots of people say to me, oh, it's all 40 to 50 years off. Who knows what will happen?
Have any of you had a boomer say this to you? Like, well,
Yeah.
I'll be dead by then anyway, who cares?
All the time.
And I think that's such a disgusting mindset, despicable mindset.
It is. It's evil. It's like, okay, yeah, it's fine. Okay, I'll just solve your problems. I don't want to solve your problems.
Yeah, disgraceful.
I can't do anything.
The day of the pillow cannot come fast enough. That's all I'm saying.
Can't do anything. So what's the point? In any case, I'll be dead by then anyway, or gaga, or very elderly, and so on. You hear that again and again, because of course what you have in modern Western societies is the extreme powerlessness of the individual. The individual can, apart from it maybe in consumption and expenditure of cash, the average individual feels totally cut off from the external society. It's what I call deep privatization.
Mexicans come here on stop us. Fuck boomers. They signed NAFTA. They allowed Mexicans to come here en masse. They allowed the 60s and 70s immigration control. They allowed everyone to come in here. They made it. They hog buildings. They hog houses. They hog boats. They're fucking greedy pieces of shit. Fuck boomers. One bullet for every fucking boomer. Day of the pillow, motherfucker.
That's my spirit animal right there.
Disavow.
In Minecraft.
If I killed them,
in Minecraft.
I understand the sentiment.
Yeah.
Privatisation in the 1980s and the 1990s meant that disbursement of public utilities was a sort of Thatcherite and neoliberal ideology. But privatisation has actually gone much deeper than that. It's the view that each is out for himself, and society hardly exists beyond the confines of one's own family, one's own extended family, and people that one happens to know. And people feel not just sort of deracinated, but depopularised and de-democratised, if there are such terms. And people are, in extraordinary sense, alone with the television, alone with the telescreen, which when they flip from channel to channel, tells them all the time that everything is perfect, and there are only nasty-minded people who will stir things up as vanguards and various forms of extremism. Extremism, of course, is something always to be rejected. But I think extremism is necessary. I think it's socially and mathematically necessary, because there has to be a logic to the logic of logic. There has to be something which takes...
I think it was quite interesting what he was speaking about just then, what he called deep privatization, where the privatization of, like Thatcherite neoliberalism had this kind of psychological and social effects on people as well, where it went much deeper than just institutions and like economic affairs, and actually got inside our brains. And as he said, sort of eradicated everybody from their surroundings so that all they really cared about was themselves. I thought that was a pretty good point. The way that this extreme individualism of liberalism has gotten so deep inside our psyches.
Everyone's just detached from one another. Like, it's just no one seems to care outside of like a few people around them, maybe.
Yeah, and it's not good. And I think, and now, I mean, you guys might have seen this on on Twitter, for example, the whole woke right thing that James Lindsay and Constantine Kissin have been trying to push. You're woke right if you care about people who aren't yourself.
Yes.
Cringe. Actually, I really wanted to actually make a video about James Lindsay and Tick History, because Tick History is one of the worst offenders for this.
Yeah,
I don't want to derail the conversation too much, but
he makes great history videos, but his politics is just like, what are you on about?
just awful. I mean, his political views are just awful. Wait, I'm gonna have to get up his tweets because I bookmarked them, and they're just dreadful, just absolutely dreadful. I mean, I saw, I'm trying to look for them now, but yeah, I saw people arguing with him in the comment section, like, you know, oh, sorry, mother, but I'm, you know, I've reached the age of 18 now, and I'm an individual now, and you can't make me clean my room. You know. Yeah. Here we go. Nationalism is just another name for socialism. We're not social groups. We are individuals who can band together for specific purposes. There is no unity for the same reasons there is no equality. Okay, I think it's weird that he's trying to. The what?
What are the English tick?
Yeah, indeed. All collectives are made up of individuals sharing a collective identity that doesn't truly exist. What? Like, no, Englishness is a thing, right? Bless him. What's the difference between a nation and a society? What's the difference between nationalism and socialism? Nothing. Bless him.
This man's read into Nazism so much he can't talk about, like, he just thinks any kind of collectivism is Nazism. Any
at all. Yeah. I think this extreme individualism is it's just awful. It's just awful. Someone says here in response to it was in response to James Lindsay, but they share the same beliefs anyway. This guy says collectivists believe in community, collective values, solidarity, doing things together. People should have a common theme and heritage and tradition and should be pushing in the same direction, and they like order. Stop. I'm already on board. I mean, yeah. Someone else says, woke is when you believe other people beside yourself matter. Anyway, yeah, we won't get too derailed on that, but
it's just the term woke right. It's just, it doesn't make sense. Like,
I know, it's bollocks. It's bollocks. Especially, like I said, I don't want to get too derailed, but especially for James Lindsay to be saying that, to be saying basically you are woke if you say that there is a group that is systemically trying to keep you down. It's like, James, you have done such great work showing how DEI stuff has infected the institutions to stop white people like succeeding. Like, how do you have this opinion at the same time? I don't understand it at all. Anyway,
takes the argument out to the furthest point on the circle. In maths, if you have a curve, you have a line that penetrates it at the furthest extent. And I believe that there has to be a logic that, in the realms of sanity and within the realms of what's possible, bisects the line at the most radical point. And that's what the people in this room are. That's what vanguard forms of identity amount to. They are the most radical manifestation of the implicit sense of becoming and belonging and identitarian man and womanhood of the ordinary people in one's own group. And you have to manifest that, and you have to represent it. Only by doing so can you have a certain effect, because you do have an effect by virtue of existing. There are many other...
Yeah, I kind of like what you're saying here. I guess it's like, you have to sort of be the most radical, sort of abstracted version of the will of the group that you hope to represent. And although they may object to like how radical you are, something in them will sense that you're working in their interests. And even if it doesn't, like, you are still at least working in their interests, right? Even if they don't appreciate it. you're working
Huey Long
for-
position.
Yeah, you're advancing your group's interests. Yeah, I mean, and somebody has to, and that person, that group will be called extreme. They will be called radical, and it's just what it is. What it is. Somebody has to do it, so somebody needs to do it. It has to be done.
A king. So just hear this. Just think of Huey Long. Like,
Yeah.
To always ask a question when anything happens: is it good for us? Is it good for us?
This is a good bit.
Or is it bad for the others? But most people think, actually, is it good for us? Far more people, even of a more vanguard or elitist temperament, are prone to say, is it good for us, rather than is it bad for the others? Because contrary to liberals, who always think that positions of identity are based on the idea of doing others down, principles of identity are usually based on boosting what is an ugly contemporary phrase, bigging up one's own group. People actually think more positively about themselves than they do before they get into negativity about others, contrary to the view that politics of identity is all about negativity towards others. And as long as you can suppress that through political correctness, everyone can live happily in a multi-cult, a multi-identity firmament or melting pot. I think the point to make about vanguardism is whenever anything happens, people in other groups and people in other vanguards and liberal humanists in our own group, the speaker said quite truthfully that it is indigenous liberals who are our real enemy. Indigenous liberals are always the enemy. Liberalism within ourselves is always the enemy. It exists even in people who regard themselves as radical to a certain extent. We've had liberalism in an uninterrupted way for centuries. Russia's never known a liberal regime. And whether one likes it or not, the politics of contemporary Russia have a lot to do with the fact that they've never known a period of liberalism. You could argue that since the restoration of the monarchy in the 1600s, we've known nothing but various forms of liberalism, most of which linked to various elements of the Protestant religion during that time. But until about the 1950s or 60s, most forms of Protestantism retained residual, illiberal, and patriotic ideas, as for a period they did in a very sectarian way in Northern Ireland. So all views have their liberal side. Even hardliners have their liberal side, which they have to guard against chipping away at them. Liberalism also feeds on indifference, and indifference to the future, and indifference to the generations that are coming in the future. But vanguardism is something different, because it lives for the virility of what might be in the future. And make no bones about it, what vanguard Caucasians think about their future is watched and is listened to by liberals and by all the other groups. So the idea that what we do and what we say and what we think has no relevance or no purport is not true. What is true is that competition between groups is part of the stuff of life. And the contemporary society is based upon the formulation that that is not the case. And because it is the case, nature will trump all of the liberal arguments. The problem is that if it doesn't take a political form, nature's trumping of liberalism will be a very painful process to live through. A very painful process for ourselves.
Nature has trumped the very foundation of liberalism.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem with liberalism, with the Enlightenment in general, is that it's fundamentally opposite to like the human condition and just nature itself.
Yeah.
And the attempt to impose it, despite that, causes all of these inherent contradictions, which so far we've done an all right job at sort of putting off and consistently kicking the can down the road. But at some point, the sort of elastic band, if you want to think of it that way, has to stretch so much that it has to snap. And as Bowden says there, that will be painful unless it's done in the proper way. And I think that's a very good point.
I mean, it's one of the ways that communists can subvert Western society so easily.
Mm-hmm. Is how?
Well, if So liberalism starts with the idea of like, so you have the status, English, you have the state of nature, right? So every human starts as an individual wandering in the woods on his own, right?
Yeah.
Now that in and of itself is incorrect, but moving beyond that, the idea is that in the state of nature, nature provides all of your rights, right? As a human being, if you live on an island on your own, there's nobody to violate your rights, right? But the thing is as humans we came together. This is what the liberals believe. We came together to formulate societies, and to create a society you need to sacrifice a certain number of your rights. So now I think it's Rousseau, in the Rousseauian view, the state now has to give you rights to essentially give you back the freedoms you had when you didn't live in a society.
Yeah.
Now,
the social contract. Yeah.
Yes. So what the communists can essentially do is just because the communists and the liberals have essentially the same end goal. Once you really get into it, and so the communists say, well, in the state of nature, you would have had this, that, and the other. So you need to give us this, that, and the other. And the liberals have to concede that position, even if they don't want to, because they'd be thinking, like, well, if we actually do that, that's actually a really bad thing for society. For instance, we probably shouldn't be transing kids. That's not good for the kids. But in the state of nature, what's to stop people transing the kids? You know.
I guess so. And that's the thing to sort of add on to your point is the Rousseauian idea is that nature provides everything that you need. And when we sort of come together to form societies, if there is anything that you need that you do not have, it's society's fault that you don't have it. And so there is an impetus for society to provide that to you. And that's kind of part of the reason there is an injustice has occurred. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why liberalism, I think, inherently, just intrinsically, naturally kind of slips steadily towards socialism, because the promises that it makes cannot be adequately fulfilled. And the socialists are justifiably able to point that out and say, look, liberalism is failing us. You promised us all this stuff. Where is that stuff?
Yeah. There's an inherent weakness in the ideology just due to its incorrect foundations. Yeah,
I mean, it's built on a lie. It's built on a lie. The whole idea of the state of nature, it's a lie. The idea that man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. That's the first line of the social contract. It's not true. Man's not born free. Man is born absolutely dependent on his family, like pissing himself and shitting himself because he's a little baby. And your family has to look after you.
The first thing you're doing is crying. Like, you're whining, screeching for your mother. Right?
And your family has to take care of you for years and years and years until you are able to fend for yourself at some point. So the idea that we're born free and then chained later isn't true. We're inherently born into a social context, this sort of like web of obligations that we owe to the people around us and that they owe to us back. So, I mean, this is why I just have such a disagreement with people like Tick or James Lindsay, who pretend that we are just these sort of floating individuals and we can enter into relations with others and then leave them as we wish. And no, that's not how it actually works at all.
Yeah.
We have obligations to others. They have obligations to us. That's actually part of what makes life meaningful. And I think it's disgraceful that liberalism wants to try and take that away from us, actually, and atomize us in the way that it has.
Yeah, just mindless robots going about their own daily business. Just consuming, yeah.
Yeah. One point that Bowden made there, I want to let him speak, but one point he made a couple of minutes ago was about, is it good for us? I think that is a question that needs to be on people's minds much more often. Whenever something happens, is it good for us? however you can, whatever, like people listening, however you conceive of us, whatever us is to you, you should be asking yourself that question when something happens, right? For me, it would be the English or the British. Is it good for us? And if it's not good for us, why are we doing it? I don't think he says it.
You could break it down to the English. You could break it down to your friends, your family.
Is it good for us?
Yeah.
Is it good for us to be the United States' bitch and to do whatever they tell us to do and to get involved in these wars in the Middle East that have nothing to do with us? No, it's not good for us. So why are we doing it? You know, and it's such a simple question, but it's so effective because of that simplicity. And another point sort of related to that, he said, we are often portrayed as being hateful, but really it's more about love for our group rather than hatred of other groups. I think that's a really good point that we should be pressing more often. It's not about hatred of other groups. Like the reason why we say the things we say and believe what we believe and fight for what we fight for is out of love for our own group. It's not based on hatred for other groups. At least it shouldn't be primarily based on that. If it's primarily based on hatred for other groups, that's not good, right? Yeah, like that's not good. You shouldn't be thinking about things with that like negative perspective. You know, it should be based on love of your own group and wanting your own group to do well and succeed.
And humans have a natural in-group preference.
We do, but liberalism tries to stamp that out, and it's actually done a fairly good job of that. Unfortunately.
And for all other persons in other groups. That is why we have to continue with putting forward passively the politics of identity from our own standpoint. Let's take something in the news at the moment. There's a large cranking up and there's a building up of energy for an attack on Iran. At the moment, it appears to be small. It appears to be a cloud, smaller than a man's hand. The United Nations has reported that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. The United Nations has reported that their nuclear technology is of dual use, but all nuclear technology is of dual use. When we developed a nuclear weapon, the Americans were staunchly opposed to us possessing it because they wished to live in a unipolar world where only one power had that particular device. Of course, all other major nations were working on these devices. I believe 34 other countries are developing some sort of nuclear program at the present time, including Saudi Arabia, because they fear that Iran is doing so nearby. But let's look at it another way. Is it in our interest that Iran is attacked? Is it in our interest that Iran is attacked? And the answer has to be that it's not in our interest. And it's not in our interest because they're not natural friends of ours, not natural enemies of ours. They exist in a different part of the world. They exist in a post-imperial situation now. We do not wish to be dragged willy-nilly into yet further wars after Iraq and Afghanistan at America's and Israel's behest. And as soon as one factors into the question Vanguardism and group identity, it becomes quite clear that the Times and the Economist and all of these neoliberal and neoconservative journals pushing for an attack upon Iran is not in our interests. And other groups configure what goes on in the world directly as whether it's in their interest or not. In a confused way, our people aren't bothered whether Iran's attacked or not. Our people sit there watching the TV and think if the Israelis do it, well, I don't know what I think really. You know, somebody down the pub said it was a good idea. I've got no idea myself. If you're legit with American help, they'll need American help. If the Americans asked us to help, we'll drag us into it. Most of our people would probably consider, is there a danger of a backwash of Islamist radicalism against us because we are lying against Muslim nations elsewhere on earth? Which is not a stupid thing to think, actually, and which is probably one of the more credible, middle-ranking opinions that people, as they sit in the front of the television, would come out with.
This was something that Bowden talked about in another speech, as the idea that if we're going to go out and bomb these Muslim countries, why would we then let loads of them come here?
Yeah,
that's so obviously stupid.
I mean, when just recently when Assad's government got overthrown, there were Syrians in the streets, some of them pro-Assad, some of them anti-Assad, who were just like battling in the streets of each other. And it's just like, what?
Yeah. I mean, if you import the world, you import the world's ethnic conflicts. You know, like you had the Hindus and the Muslims fighting over a cricket match in like Leicester or something, was it, a few months ago? Yeah. You know, yeah, it's bloody stupid, isn't it? But yeah. So he was saying, you know, we can go out and bomb these countries. Like, it's better that we don't, but we can do it. Okay. But we can't have mass immigration from these countries, if that's the case.
We can do it, but is it a good idea?
No. And
is it good for us?
Is
the
it
question
good for us?
posed earlier.
Is it good for us? No, it's obviously bloody not. And the thing is, it sort of works in both directions as well, right? If you bomb the countries and then let people in, that's obviously stupid. But if you let the people in and then bomb the countries, that's also bloody stupid, because now they're here and they can do something about it. They can, you know, go and protest, or they could stab people or bomb people or whatever. People have done this, right?
Independent MPs who are standing up in Parliament for the rights of the people of Gaza.
Yeah. That Ali Harbi Ali, the one who stabbed the MP, David Amos, he said he was doing it because of, Aaron, you'll have to correct me on this, I believe he said he was doing it because of the Syrians. But I might be wrong about that. But he definitely said he was doing it because he was pissed off about a certain Muslim group that was, you know, being attacked because of us or whatever.
I mean, throw a dart at a map of the world, probably wouldn't be far off.
Yeah. So, again, is it good for us? No, it's obviously not. Why are we doing it then? You know.
But if our people began to think more in terms of an identitarian prospect, they would nevertheless come to the conclusion that it's not in our interest to attack Iran. And that's just one issue out of an enormous number that could be pre-configured. Is it in our interest to help bail out the euro? Is it in our interest to engage in yet more wars with the United States of America? Is it in our interest to have American bases on our own soil? Is it in our interest to endlessly have a culture of Marxian deconstruction on over all of our media in comparison to what pre-existed the relative social conservatism of the 1950s? If you slot in all of these ideas, which the masses of people are completely unconcerned about, and yet ask an identity-related question, you come up with the answer that it's not in our interest. Then you need to switch the questions around and ask, are there certain things which are in our interests rather than against our interests at a particular moment in time?
That's very, very good as well, right? Look at it on the flip side. Okay, what could we do that's in our interests? And why aren't we doing it? And these are such simple questions, but our politicians seemingly do not ask them. Or if they do ask them, they're not thinking about the British people. They're thinking about themselves or specific groups that they're a part of, or specific groups which fund them. Well, or other specific groups that may be funding them. They may be thinking about their interests rather than British interests.
Like Keir Starmer's presumed alliance with BlackRock. If we just get rid of the farmers and sell all their land to BlackRock, it's like, well, why would we do that? Is that good for us?
Yeah.
No.
Well, no, it's not in our interests, but it is in the interest of the globalists for that to happen.
I guess it's good for Keir Starmer. I mean,
yeah, if he finds himself aligned with the sort of technocratic globalist class, which he obviously does, then he could ask himself, is it in our interests? And the answer would be, well, yeah. It's not in the British people's interests, though, which is ostensibly supposed to be the point of our elected representatives.
It's literally why he's there.
Yeah. So, and this is another part of the problem with like liberalism and capitalism as well, is the ability of foreigners to influence our politics and to buy up property and to own companies here and to profit, to extract that sort of profit from our country and take it back to theirs. Is you can have these foreign interest groups which influence our politics for their benefit, not giving a shit about our benefit.
You have all these wealthy Saudis that like buy up massive amounts of like property in London and just hold on to it because our housing market currently is in the shitter. And so the housing prices just keep going up and up and up. So the Saudis just keep buying huge swathes of housing in London and just sit there as the value just keeps climbing.
It's not just them. Russians, Chinese, Indians do it as well.
Well, the Russians aren't anymore because they've been like Ukraine
not anymore.
Part of the market, but like, yeah,
not.
It used to be the Russians.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have, certain groups which are quite wealthy, which are able to influence things in their favor, and lobbying. The merchant class, right, is what I'm talking about.
The merchant class, yeah.
And the actions that we end up undertaking. Oh, I say we, but we don't actually have any say in the matter, right? The politicians do it. We undertake these actions which are detrimental for us, which are not in our interests, but are in their interests. And I shouldn't even have to say it, but it shouldn't be like that. I get into arguments with people sometimes, so it's like, I'll be talking about immigration or something, right? And they'll say, well, you should stop bombing their countries then, and they wouldn't have to leave them. And I say, look, I don't want to bomb your fucking countries. I have no interest in your country.
Great, like, can you tell our government that?
Yeah. I am not bombing your country. I'm not in favor of bombing your country. It's the government. It's not me.
I'm not personally jumping into the fighter jets and bombing your country.
Yeah, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit about your country, like positively or negatively. Anyway.
Is it in our interest for a significant proportion of our media to be owned by foreigners? Probably not. Is it in our interest for a considerable part of our media to be owned by pornographers? Probably not. Is it in our interest for much of our banking and for much of our media to be totally international and to have no national specificity at all? Probably not. Is it in our interests that so many of our politicians are part of a jet set, international and humanist class that sees Britain as a puddle to their own self and corporate advancement? No, it's not. As soon as you factor into all of these questions, Vanguard and elitist propositions on behalf of a group, you come up with an interconnected series of answers about what's in your interest and what's not. When Tony Blair went to war over Iraq, he said it was in our interests to hug America close. And he was part of an ideology called Hug Them Close. This is the idea that you never allow, particularly if you're a social democrat in the British context, on the right of the Labour Party, any blue water at all between what you and what American foreign policy wants at any particular time. Even if privately you don't agree with a lot of it, you still, in a Gates-like way, go along with it. But is it in our interest to behave in that manner? When we try to act independently,
why does the Labour
in
Party,
what may well
or
have
at least
been a
the Social Democrats within the Labour Party, feel the need to suck America's dick?
America slapped us down, snapped us in the face and slammed the chops. And we had no particular answer either. When a run on the pound was engineered by the United States in order to humiliate the country and the error of its ways in going for some unilateral action with the French and the Israelis, but not at the behest of American power as it manifested at that particular moment, we were shown what was what. And it's interesting to note that amongst the extraordinary memorialism, which is part of contemporary culture, where obscure Olympics are remembered And Manchester United's victories in the 60s are remembered, and various other events are churned over by the media. Suez is never dwelt on. Suez is never mentioned. 50 years on from Suez receives this much attention, and the reason it does receive no attention is because it was a rank humiliation for the then ruling class in this country, who learned some very savage lessons, and that was you keel to the United States like an aggressive bulldog and never raise to do anything without their cognizance. And part of the multi-ethnic reconfiguration of these islands is American by proxy, because everything that happens there happens here with a slight time lag, because we have modelled ourselves upon their model of near open borders.
Sorry, I had to go downstairs real quick.
Oh right, I was wondering if you could hear me as well, because I was saying things.
Okay.
No, you was talking about the Suez Canal crisis.
Yes.
I thought, and I love this because I bring this up all the time when I talk about the fact that British politicians feel the need to suck America's dick, and it's like I understand sort of there's geopolitical dynamics of this, right? But in my opinion, what really killed the British Empire was not the Second World War, as it is often stated. It's the refusal of post-war British politicians to stand up to the United States, who was directly attacking our empire.
Yeah. I mean, I would say to an extent the decline already started after the First World War, when we sent off like the bulk of our young aristocratic class to go and die in the trenches. But definitely exacerbated by the Americans later on.
Yeah, I guess the decline of the British Empire is a complex topic. And yeah, there's many things to talk about there, because it wasn't just, there's not like a singular event, but the Suez crisis makes it very clear that America was just like, right, America viewed themselves in a position where they could essentially just, I don't even know how to explain, basically just like rope in Western Europe in a way.
Yeah.
Just
I mean,
put us all on a leash.
Well, that was the whole point of the Marshall Plan, wasn't it, really? We'll give you loads of money, but there are conditions which come along with that. And we know that you need this money in order to rebuild, so you're our bitch now.
Not only that, but there was also the Lend-Lease Act during the war, where America would sell the Allied powers equipment for the war. America asked for, because basically America put like, right, we'll put the loans for this, so like obviously like you have to pay for this, but you don't have to pay for this now, you can pay it after the war. So it's like, right, that sounds like a good deal. And the war ended, and the day the war ended, America was like, right, the money now. And it's like, well, we don't have the fucking money now. What do you mean? Half the country's in ruins.
Do you know what? They're cheeky bastards as well, right? Because the French lent them fucking loads of money for their revolution, for the American Revolution. French lent them loads of money. And when they started asking for it back, shortly before the French Revolution, which was in large part actually caused by the economic crisis of France in that time, they went to America and said, could you start paying back some of that money, please? And they're like, nah.
It's very cheeky, and I think I've said this before, but the downfall of America will be its hubris.
I hope so. I know it's quite a controversial opinion, but I mean, I think the sooner the American empire collapses, the better. I think I've asked you this before, Charlie. Can you think of any country that has been worse for Britain than the United States? Any country that's had a more negative effect on Britain, like the health of Britain, than the United States?
I mean, I guess depending on the time scale we're working with here, I guess the only person I could say is probably worse is maybe William the Conqueror. Maybe.
I mean, that was 1,000 years ago, though.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like we're stretching the time scale a little bit here, you know. It's like,
yeah, I mean, in that sense, we could even say like Caesar, you know. if we're going that deep back in history, you could say Caesar, you know, pretty bad for the Britons, yeah.
well, I'd probably say the Roman conquest of Britain probably did Britain a lot of good, actually, but maybe that's a controversial opinion. But
yeah, but yeah, it's it's disgusting. It is disgusting. I hate it.
The thing is, right, is the America having an empire in of itself wouldn't be a problem if the empire America ran wasn't so parasitic.
Well, and so like anti-civilizational as well. Like they insist that we take on their values, and their values are poison.
It's so odd as well, because you would think, being a nation that came from British settlers, they have a very sort of English way of doing things, but then because they're a republic, when you try to apply it to Britain, it doesn't work, because the political dynamics of the situation are just completely different.
Well, I think there are multiple factors to it. So obviously it was started off by Englishmen, but actually I believe I'm right in saying that most Americans are German rather than English. And then also you have the fact that I feel like there's this complex that people never really talk about. I feel like the Americans have this sort of complex, right? We're the new world, and for some reason they just have this insatiable drive to destroy the old world. And that's why they've basically taken over Europe as like its imperium, and are now doing everything in their power to just completely destroy any remnant of the old world.
Well, you need to remember they're a revolutionary republic.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Oh, I
I
mean,
I guess in that
can't
way,
express
they're
my
different
hatred
from
for.
French.
Yeah, I can't express my hatred for America enough. Not the Americans as like individuals or whatever before like people get mad, but just America like as a project, as a propositional nation, as just the awful influence that it's had on Britain and Europe as a whole. And just like the course of history since America was created, basically, it's just been like one big downhill, just rolling downhill.
Well, definitely since America has been one of the hegemons of the world. But I think something very interesting there is the fact that they're a propositional nation. And I think that is the root cause of lots of issues.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there's no... I don't know how to explain it other than... Yeah, it's not real. There's no sustenance there. You know, it's like... There's if you want to picture the idea of like a house, right? America has like the frame. It's got the foundations and the frame, but there's no actual like house there.
Well, I mean, their houses are actually made of like paper, right? As opposed to European houses, which are made of bricks. You know, so pretty good metaphor there. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's the same reason why you have people today, like Konstantin Kisin, for example, talking about how, you know, as long as you adhere to British values, then, you know, you're just as British as anybody else. No, that's not how it works in the old world, mate. That's not how it works in Europe. That's an American import that you're trying to impose on us.
I mean, Mohammed can drink tea as much as he wants, but he's, you know, I'm still looking at there, and there's a man from Pakistan named Mohammed.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Oh, disgraceful. But we'll have to do a big American hatred stream sometime.
Went to war over Iraq. You said it was in your interests to hug America close.
I've just rewinded it because I missed the last thing, so sorry to have to repeat it. But
That's fine.
And he was part of an ideology called Hug Them Close.
But to be fair, this bit
This
is
the
really
idea
good
that you
anyway.
never
So
allow, particularly if you're a social democrat in the British context, on the right of the Labour Party, any blue water at all between what you and what American foreign policy wants at any particular time. Even if privately you don't agree with a lot of it, you still, in a Gates-like way, go along with it. But is it in our interest to behave in that manner? When we tried to act independently in what may well have been a folly-laden enterprise, which was the Suez operation in 1956, America slapped us down, slapped us in the face, and us round the chops. And we had no particular answer either. When a run on the pound was engineered by the United States in order to humiliate this country and show it the error of its ways in going for some unilateral action with the French and the Israelis, but not at the behest of American power as it manifested at that particular moment, we were shown what was what. And it's interesting to note that amongst the extraordinary memorialism, which is part of contemporary culture, where obscure Olympics are remembered, and Manchester United's victories in the 60s are remembered, and various other events are churned over by the media, Suez is never dwelt on. Suez is never mentioned. 50 years on from Suez receives this much attention, and the reason it does receive no attention is because it was a rank humiliation for the then ruling class in this country, who learned some very salient post-war lessons, and that was that you keel to the United States like an aggressive bulldog and never basically venture to do anything without their cognizance. And part of the multi-ethnic reconfiguration of these islands is American by proxy.
sorry.
That's smart to myself, basically. The British ruling class at the time should have said to the Americans, "How about you get fucked?" That should have been the response.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, by the time that the Suez Crisis happened, we were already America's bitch. So it's kind of difficult to tell them to get fucked. That was
Okay.
what, 56? Yeah, so
I don't understand
11
the
years.
mindset of being someone's bitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think a large part of it comes down to Churchill, to be honest. He loved America. He was half American himself. He really started it off. He was more than happy to sell us out, to whore us out to the Americans. More than happy to do it.
I don't think this is what he expected, though, to be fair.
No, I mean, of course, he couldn't predict like how it would turn out, but shouldn't have done it in the first place. And I mean, I love how angry Bowden gets when he talks about America smacking us around the chops. It's like, yeah, it's true. Like, it's an embarrassment for us to, for Britain, right, or England to have to bow down to like Americans. Awful. We have pubs older than that country.
Wasn't the idea you wanted to get rid of us in 1776?
Yeah, and then they got a taste of power, and they've been like a shark smelling blood in the water. They got a little taste of power due to the First World War and Second World War. Obviously, they had very good industries, so they were able to make a lot of money off it. They got a taste of the blood, and they've never let go of it since. And like I said, this complex that they have, where they want to stamp out the old world for some reason, and turn it into the new world, the sort of McDonald'sization of everything. They just can't stop themselves. They just can't stop themselves. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting mad, Charlie.
Everything that happens there happens here with a slight time lag, because we have modelled ourselves upon their model of near open borders and fiscal and capitalist movement of money all over the world, whereby communist China now controls large sections of the debt mountain that holds up the United States, and where two systems that could be said to be at war with each other ideologically, ultra-capitalist America and post-communist China, actually have each other in a handshake as well as round the throat, because they now rely on each other to prop each other up in the chaotic world system that now has evolved. The euro is in desperate trouble, and the Chinese were asked last month to help bail the euro out, and they refused. And quite rightly they refused, because it's not in China's interest to bail out the European economies unless they are reduced to an African level where they can buy country by country. As you know, China is buying up Africa. They basically say that they say to the black Africans in the sub-Sahara, unlike the whites and unlike the Arabs, we've never oppressed you. Let us buy your country. And they're transforming Africa. Eventually there will be, and there partly are, Chinese cities in Africa. It's not a stupid idea.
This speech was given in 2011, by the way. So this China buying up Africa has been going on for a lot longer than most people realise.
Oh yeah, it's been going on for. China is on a mission to destroy the United States, basically, for lack of a better way to put it. Or also the West more generally. This is why they want all of like our manufacturing. All this is why they're trying to basically buy up the entire global economy. Essentially, is so that way, once it does devolve into war, nobody has anything besides China. So that puts them at a significant advantage, because China realizes in a straight conflict they're not going to beat the United States. They can't. The United States military is something else entirely. But what America's weakness is not its military. America's weakness lies in its culture and in its economy. And that's what China's been trying to exploit for quite a while now. Just imagine any country that tries to stand up to China, right? And China just says, right, well, we're just going to cut off imports then. You can't buy anything from us anymore. That country's going to be in hell of a state. Right? Because they essentially be almost closed off to the entire global market, because everything is owned and produced in China these days. So you would have a nation that essentially would suddenly have to find itself being almost entirely self-sufficient, which, considering the globalized economy we have today in the 21st century, no country is really in a position to do that right now.
Yeah, that's a massive problem that we need to start doing something about. Is I mean, I have no idea how we would even make that work, but I mean, we're actually getting rid of like our last steel books now. We're shutting loads of them down. But we need to rebuild our industry so that we can survive on our own, because globalism, I believe, it's not going to last forever.
It won't last forever, and it'll be China who kills it.
Probably. But
that's what they're
and we
trying
need
to
to
do
be
right
ready
now.
for it. We
That's
need
why
to
they're
be
buying
far
up
more
the global economy.
Yeah, we need to be far more self-sufficient than we are. I mean, I think it's sort of bordering on treasonous to put us in this position where we can't even look after ourselves.
A great place to start would be saying, right, well, there needs to be some sort of level of protection of like strategic industries. So things like our steel production, our food production, water, like fuel, like things like that. It's like, well, maybe we shouldn't let these things be bought up by foreign companies.
Yeah,
maybe it's a good idea. Maybe it's a good idea if they're not profitable. Maybe it's a good idea to actually subsidize them.
Yeah, well, and that's a big one actually. When you look at like Thatcher, for example, right? And I know the more liberal-minded people will probably take issue with this, right? But when you look at, for example, all of the unprofitable car manufacturers that we have, the automobile industry that we had before Thatcher came in. And she said, look, we're going for neoliberalism now. We have to let things fail. If they're going to fail, if they're not efficient enough that they can't afford to run, then we let them fail, right? And that capital will be reallocated elsewhere and it will improve everything. One thing that she didn't think about somehow was that the cost of paying the benefits of all of these workers that were going to lose their jobs as a result of these policies was more expensive than it would have been to just subsidize the industry. So not only have you destroyed our car making industry, you actually haven't saved any money from it.
No, it's just we've lost so much capability of sustaining ourselves for no benefit whatsoever. The only people it's benefited is China.
And actually, I mean, there are loads more downsides that are not economic, right? All of those men that lost jobs had families that they were supporting, right? Many of them turned to drink, right? Which has had a sort of knock-on effect. Even to this day, many areas of the north are really still quite deprived because of the sort of echoes of the destruction of our industry caused by the disgraceful ideology that is neoliberalism, which just doesn't care about people at all, doesn't care about community. Now, maybe I'm woke right, but I actually do care about people. I actually do care about community. So
no, it's this neoliberalism, man. We got to make the spreadsheets balance out. You see,
efficiency, bro.
They'll begin running the bureaucracies. They will end up with their own demographic change, and with a smile on their face as they do it, they will take that continent. There's a new scramble for Africa, and it's not Europeans who are doing it. Our time over there when South Africa went has gone. The problem is not the dispossession of our colonial elites of the past, but the dispossession of our communities at home in the future and in the present. But my view is that as long as there is a vanguard to put forward the proposition of an exclusiveness for ourselves, there will always be hope. And that is independent of political parties. Political parties come and go. I believe a new one will be reconfigured in the next 18 months to 2 years on the basis of all the splits and splitting which has gone on at the present time. I believe that a new political party is the way forward, but our own people won't vote for it. Not in sufficient numbers, because they're afraid, and because they're in a funk, and because they would like something to happen, but are frightened of the consequences, and think that even to mention these things isn't nice. Only a vanguard can mention these sorts of issues, because only a vanguard is unafraid to deal with the thought of not being nice. These ideas afflict and paralyze our people to a degree which is quite extraordinary. Probably.
I mean, this is a massive demonstration of the failure of democracy.
People don't have parties that actually represent them, you mean?
Well, not even that. Is that if a party comes along that does represent them, they don't vote for them because they fear the consequences. So what's the point of the democratic system if we're just going to have the same establishment just running the country eternally anyway?
Well, this is one thing that Bowden actually said in another speech, obviously speaking back in like sort of 2009, 2010, was about the total liberal capture of the political system. Because at that time, you had, what was it, Nick Clegg for the Lib Dems running against David Cameron for the Tories, running against Gordon Brown for Labour. And he was saying, when you look at these three men, it's basically the same person, right? They're all just wannabe Blairs promising liberalism. So it doesn't matter who you vote for, you're going to get a knockoff Blair either way. And I mean, totally true. Like David Cameron, ostensibly a right-winger, right? Member of the Conservative Party, was, just Tony Blair 2.0, actually went further than Blair in many respects. And Peter Hitchens was totally right to say that, he was begging people back in like 2009, 2010, please do not vote for the Tories, because if David Cameron gets in, then we're screwed, because then the right-wing party will be like locked in as a Blairite party, because they'll see like, well, we won, so people obviously want this, and then they'll never change.
Yeah, and now you have Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah. Who has just replaced Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, and the fact that people see this now anyway, and they're just like, well, I can't. I mean, I don't know if this is me. I don't know if like the average person in the UK is probably like 60 IQ or something. I genuinely don't know what the issue is. But I just look at people who vote for the Conservatives and Labour, and I just think, why?
What's wrong with you?
Like, even looking like at sort of many of even if like why right-wing people vote for the Conservatives is absolutely beyond me. I genuinely cannot fathom the mindset. But at least even with like left-wing people voting for like the Labour Party, I just think like, well, hang on a minute. You've currently got like the Labour Party who's trying to like outflank the Tories on like the right. It's like, this isn't what you want. Like,
no,
both the Tories and the Labour seem to be trying to outflank the other party from like the opposite position that they should be.
That was very confusing.
And if that doesn't make it confusing enough, their voters are like, don't support this, but they keep voting for them anyway. And it's like, what?
The things with the Tories, though, is that the Tory boys, the fucking retards who vote for them, they love it. They love it when the Tories do left-wing stuff. They're like, yeah, we have to do this because this is going to get us elected, and it's a good thing anyway, and why are you complaining about it, you bigot? Like, loads of Tory boys.
That's why we did so well with the last election.
When Kemi Badenoch was put forward, loads of Tory boys were saying, yeah, brilliant. Another female leader, that will show Labour, and she's black. The party is pale, male, and stale. She's just as British as you or me. Why are you being racist? And this is people who are supposed to be right-wing.
And then for some reason, when all of the right-wing people in Britain said, okay, we're not voting for you anymore, apparently they didn't seem to clock onto that being, maybe we did something bad.
Well, I mean, I've just come to the conclusion, I don't even think this is that controversial, to be honest. Tories are not right-wing. Like, they are...
No, they're not.
Well, they are definitely liberals, but, I mean, they're also essentially progressives. Just a little bit slower than Labour. Conservatives are left-wing.
Yes, they are.
So we actually don't have any right-wing representation, because I wouldn't even call Reform right-wing.
I would say Reform's probably like centre-right, to be honest. But I would say like the problem with Reform is I was hearing someone talk about this the other day, and I thought this was actually quite a good sort of general. I think this is actually quite true. So you have Nigel Farage and the other four Reform MPs, and they have like their position, right? So they're sort of like centre right, a bit soft, a bit wet, and then you have the actual members who are like genuine nationalists, and then basically and what the MPs of Reform are trying to do is, because the Reform MPs and Nigel, what they want is they want Tories to come over to Reform. The problem with that is that the nationalists are sitting there going, well, hang on, these people are traitors. Right? The Tories are traitors. We don't want them. And you can see this because Rupert Lowe, I think he is.
Yeah.
He's been basically sitting in Parliament, just basically whipping all the other MPs, saying, "Give us data, give us data, give us data."
He's been
Right?
pretty good lately. Yeah.
Yeah, he's been doing very well. So just all of this information has just been coming out because it's like once he's requested it, there's like a legal requirement for them to put it out because it's been requested by an MP. So all of like the corruption, all of like the shit has just been coming out because Rupert Lowe has just been going around Parliament just whipping the MPs, basically saying, "Give us information." So you have sort of like Rupert Lowe, who's like the representation of like the nationalist part of like reform, and then you have like Zia Youssef and like Richard Tice on the other side, who like want the Tories to come over. And I have a feeling Nigel is sort of sitting there on this knife edge, sort of trying to balance between the two. And sorry, that's me. Essentially, I think what's going to happen sooner or later is because Nigel said he's going to leave the party in 2029. And I assume he would if he doesn't win the next election, obviously. Be a bit weird of him to step down if he won the election, you know.
Yeah. I mean, they won't.
But
yeah.
They probably won't know. But what happened is Nigel will have to leave, and then Reform have to pick a leader. Of the current MPs, Rupert Lowe is going to win that. I know you will, because you'll get the overwhelming support of the membership.
Yeah.
At which point, Reform will become a staunchly more right-wing party, I think. It would have to, because the members would have basically just dragged it over.
Yeah, one would hope
regardless
so.
of what the MPs think. And
I just
I
found
think
it brilliant. Go on. Sorry, finish your point and then.
No, I was just thinking, like, because Richard Tice, I think, is a great example of like the two factions within the party. Because sometimes you go and see, like, I'm just going to use like his Twitter post for an example. Like, you'll see Richard Tice say something on Twitter, and it'd be like extremely based, and you'll be like, right, that's a brilliant take. And then you log on tomorrow, and he's just said the most wet, like, retarded thing ever. And it's just like, God.
Oh no.
And I think Richard Tice is like trying to basically juggle the two factions of the party, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. There are definitely two factions within Reform. And I mean, somehow they just have to make sure that the right one wins, because we can't just have like microwaved Thatcherism. It's not good enough. Nowhere near good enough.
Reform can't remain that way, because sooner or later Nigel's going to have to leave, and when he does, the members are just going to drag it well over to the right, because the members won't accept anything less.
I really, really hope so. But yeah, this graph that I've got here shows the social values on a sort of left-right scale, right? Left being liberal, right being authoritarian, of Labour MPs and Labour voters, Conservative MPs and Conservative voters. And one thing you'll notice is that the MPs of both parties are to the left of their voters on social issues. Conservative MPs are only very slightly to the right of the average Labour voter.
It makes you wonder why people and that shows you, right? And this is why, like, I hate people who like get factional about politics and refuse to change who they vote for. The north of England, if it wasn't for Thatcher, would vote Conservative.
Yeah, well, and they did when Boris was there. But what a letdown he was. I wouldn't be surprised if
they've been betrayed by the Conservatives twice now.
I mean,
and I think that's why the north of England, if you look at the polling and stuff like that, is going heavily Reform.
Yes.
Because
they've been abandoned by Labour, they've been abandoned by the Tories. Yeah.
It's at the point where it's like the reason the vote of the north of England is changing is because they literally, it's a case of like a man who has no options left is a very dangerous person.
Yeah, indeed. I don't know if you've seen this, but They made a Wikipedia page for the term Boris wave.
Yeah, I saw this.
Incredible. Because, I mean, somehow there are still people who don't blame Boris Johnson for this. Like, they sort of seem to think that it was Rishi. I mean, Rishi wasn't even there for that long, really. Like, in the grand scheme of things, the massive upsurge was Boris.
Yeah, this is completely Boris Johnson's fault.
Because he's a
Rishi,
liberal.
at the end of the day, was quite inconsequential. He didn't really do anything.
No, not really.
He just existed.
Yeah, he was just holding space until they could get the based black woman ready for it. Anyway.
These ideas afflict and paralyze our people to a degree which is quite extraordinary. Probably, viewed systematically, more pressure has to be put for there to be more of a radical response. Such pressure is always possible. Economic collapse is always possible. New wars and disturbances are always possible. But one thing we may have to get used to is the idea that as a group and as an ethnicity, we exist in Europe and North America and Australasia and also all over the world. There are plenty of other groups who see themselves as transnational groups, who see their destiny all over the world. They see their destiny in vanguard terms. They see their destiny as having a core group within their own selves that can come back from anything. Not only do they ask the question when it is asked of them, is it good for me or is it bad for me or my group, they also are prepared to cleave.
You know who he's talking about, right?
I did actually miss a bit there. My fault, because I just go look at something.
Oh, that's all right.
But it was just give me a brief breakdown what he was going on about.
The idea that your group can come back from anything as long as you have a strong enough in-group preference.
I mean, first thing that comes to my mind is the Reconquista.
Oh, well, that's not a bad, not a bad example, I suppose. But no, he's talking about the merchants.
Ethnicities have preserved themselves 67% genetically and more since the ancient world. And they've done so by a culture of coherence and identity which crosses national borders and which understands that if a group is to survive, it may need to adopt some radical measures which involve rolling with the blows. English and British people exist all over the world.
It's quite extraordinary.
We exist all over the world.
Sorry?
It's just quite extraordinary, actually, how the Jews have managed to survive 2,000 years without a state.
Oh,
yes. I mean, that is effort.
Yeah, and it explains their incredibly strong in-group preference.
Yep.
So, yeah. One thing, I actually really don't agree with this part. He's saying, like, as long as there are English people, we'll be all right, basically. I don't think that's true, man. Like, if we lose England, then we're fucked. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want to be in a position where we do not have a homeland.
No, we don't. It actually reminds me a little bit of the "We Shall Never Surrender" speech by Churchill. People tend to leave this part out, but after Churchill says we will never surrender, he continues on and he says, even if for a moment, which I do not believe, a large part of this island, or this island or large parts of it were subjugating or starving, then our empire across the seas would carry on the struggle until in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, will come to the rescue and liberation of the old.
And look how that turned out.
It's like, well, it's great that I guess we can have faith in our Anglo brethren across the seas, but they do also have their differences, and they're not quite the same thing.
and they like low-key hate us?
I wouldn't say they hate us. I mean, the America, just singling out the Americans, not talk about them for a second. The Canadians, the Aussies, and the Kiwis, I don't think they hate us.
Oh, no. Sorry, I just meant the Americans. Yeah.
Yeah, the context of this speech was made in 1940, before America got involved in the war, by the way. So he is talking about like the actual empire, the colonies.
Right. Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
All over Europe, all over North America, all over Australasia, in quite a few of the countries of Latin America, in most of the ex-colonies. English is the language of the world. It's the lingua franca of modernity or post-modernity. We have given the world a great lot, and this is just to refract our own identity through the national consciousness of one particular people who are actually a part of it. So I think the worst thing that can be uttered at this time is despair. Because there are more than enough of us to provide the vanguard which is necessary. The trick is to link the vanguard to the popular will, and to find a way to link the vanguard to the popular will. So far, organisationally, in the post-Second World War world, there has been a failure to link the vanguard to the popular will. And that has occurred in all the societies of Western and Central Europe, and has occurred even in the post-communist Eastern European societies, where it did appear that such a thing was on the cards immediately after communism collapsed. It's also true to say that communism inoculated these populations against the worst and the most noxious forms of liberalism. The new right thinker Tomislav Stunic, who lived under communism and was imprisoned by it in Croatia with other members of his family, once said that communism rots the body, but liberalism rots the soul. And there's a strong degree of truth to that remark.
Good quote. And
That is a
true.
very good quote.
Yeah.
Now let me tell you about monarchy.
Because liberalism attacks on the internal front, on the front of values and identity. It's why the majority of our people refute their vanguardistic yearnings and callings. Most people, particularly teenage boys, have a sort of yearning for vanguardism when they're early in life. And then they forget it as they get older, and it becomes smeared and smudged over by various forms of liberal orthodoxy. They start either not voting, or they vote for one of the prescribed parties, Conservative and Unionist.
I've just got more
Democrat,
radical as I've gotten
Labour.
older.
As long as you remember.
Oh, me too.
It's just I definitely developed my rebellious phase during my teenage years, but it definitely has not gone away. It's only gotten stronger.
I don't. For me, it's more. I guess it's more about like, I don't know, events. It's both. It's like the external and sort of internal. Like obviously my thoughts have changed. I've sort of developed sort of, my perspective, the way I look at things. But then outside influences have obviously affected that. Like COVID really radicalized me. Really, really changed like my perspective on a lot of things. And really brought me over to the right, like properly. Just because of how like fucked up it was, like the psychological warfare,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like COVID was awful. Like for me, it didn't radicalize me personally, because I actually, personally during the COVID years, I actually benefited quite a lot. I actually managed to like sort a lot of my shit out, if that makes sense. Like it's almost like I got like a brief. The world gave me a brief respite to like sort my shit out in a way. So it's like I personally sort of benefited from it, but I know like 99% of other people did not benefit from it. So yeah,
no,
but that's a uniquely me thing. And I've forgotten the original point I was going to make.
That's okay. In the meantime, we will welcome Project Rasmus.
Hello, little men. Big man here. Nice to be here.
How's it going?
Ben.
Good. I've got myself I'll read it out because I can't remember the name. A Rockstar energy drink. So, starting the day off healthy. Tropical guava. That sounds posh.
Ooh.
Right, so you got a knockoff monster.
I did, yeah. Cheaper as well.
Isn't Rockstar? Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say, isn't Rockstar like more expensive than Monster? But
You know,
I
that
don't
does
know.
actually make sense. Yeah, and it was at the corner shop as well. So he off break hikes the price up, doesn't he?
Mm,
I go in there, I get mugged. Ridiculous.
I'm changing the cigarettes I'm smoking because the Marlboro Golds I get cost me 16 quid.
You need
That's
to get
half.
on the tobacco, man. Like rolling tobacco, so much cheaper.
Well, I was going to start getting B&H greens because they're £12.50.
It
I
also
don't
just
know, man.
seems more manly.
They're
always been a
£12
roll-up
they're £12.50 and they're longer. So it's just like, well, why wouldn't I get that?
I've always been a roll-up guy. Like it's less. It's obviously not healthy, right? But it's less unhealthy and it's way cheaper.
I can't be bothered to carry all that shit around.
You get used to it, man.
My pocket's already stacked enough as is when I go to the pub. I'm literally sitting there waiting to get mugged.
Cash.
It's not cash. It's like I bring half the fucking house with me. Like,
You should just like not do that, and then and then your problems would be solved.
it's just because it's like I get the train to the pub, so it's like so I basically have like a sort of like hour travel basically. So it's like I've got to bring loads of stuff with me so I can just like go on my phone, get like my earphones out, watch a video, things like that.
You take like the what's it called, the phone bank thing with you or whatever as well. You know what I mean, the battery thing. What's it called?
Oh no! I don't bring that with me.
Right.
My phone isn't that bad, but I've got to bring I bring like headphones with me, and then I've got my phone, and then I've got my cigs, a lighter, I've got my wallet,
Yeah.
and then there might be some other things I bring with me.
Depending.
Yeah, depending, and it suddenly you start to notice that you fucking like my trousers are falling down. Yeah.
Staying in that area, you're pretty safe in this country, job-wise, career-wise, matrimonially-wise, in terms of reputation, in terms of bourgeois reputation in particular. If you step outside of those boundaries, and it's quite a wide boundary, Liberals would say, look, we've given you as wide a space as almost anywhere in the world where you can cavort and make hay and make political pronouncements. Why do you need to go outside that? Why do you need to go out into these extremist and unheralded furrows and sort of support things which are countercultural and anti-system? And the reason that one would choose to do so is because they're not in the interests of the group from which one originates. That's the only reason that one would choose to do so. The only reason is for the elite to protect the mass and seek to bring it forward in history, because the mass can never act for itself. In Orwell's novel, 1984, which I mentioned at the end, Winston and Julia fail in their rebellion, feeble though it was, against the all-powerful party. And Orwell wants them to be seen to fail at the end of the novel. But hope lies in the proles, if you remember. Hope lies in the thick-set woman with the laundry basket who's singing a song. It was only a hopeless fancy. Do you remember that? It was only a hopeless fancy. As she puts the diapers on the line, she's singing It Was Only a Hopeless Fancy, which is a prole-feed song given to them by the Ministry of Propaganda in that particular society. My view is that the future always lies with the elite, not with the mass. The future lies with those that will mould the mass and that will prepare for its energisation when a moment comes. That's why my message is one not of despair, but of hope for the future. Because as long as indigenous, nationally conscious, ethnically aware, racially aware, inegalitarian, elitist, and other values and views are put forth in a coherent way, in a sane way, and in an educated way, because that's what people expect views to put forward in such a way. As long as that happens, there is always hope for the future, because people will align in extremis with their own defence mechanism, and they will align with the people who have put forward the defensive barrister's case which can become offensive as well as defensive in a particular political and social moment. My view is that as long as there is a continuous effort to put forward the elitist agenda of our own group, in the sense that a proportion of people are prepared to place upon their own shoulders the burden of the moral leadership of their own group. That's what the Black Muslims do. What the Black Muslims in the United States do is they put themselves forward in the most radical way possible. The bulk of American blacks have no interest in Islam at all, and are Christian, and often deeply so, and will only vote for Christian politicians. Yet their most radical vanguard group has adopted Islam, and they've done so because in their own way of looking at things, they consider it to be a less white, a less Western formulation, which is more in keeping with their own sense of their own self, their own strength, their own determinacy. The similar phenomenon can be found among so-called white extremists, where many are against pagan and other views, because they basically want a viewpoint which, from their point of view, is totally cardinal and it relates to themselves and to no one else. But that's fine. Because all those views do is they.
So was that like a big thing back then and all? Like just like your Germanic pagan right? Was that a thing then as well?
This is 2011. I think a lot of stuff that we think of as being like fairly new is like older than we think, you know. Like he was mentioning earlier about the Chinese buying up Africa, and loads of people, if they're even aware of it at all, think that started, 5 years ago or whatever. But like I said, this is from 2011.
I'm gonna be honest, I thought this was from the 90s or something.
2011, yeah.
Right.
Sustain the strength of the vanguard. That's why people adopt radical metaphysical views, about which many people in this room would argue amongst themselves. But that's not the point. They're the fuel. They're the food. They're the element that keeps people staunch, because it's difficult amongst the withering condescension of a liberal society to maintain elitism.
One thing that's really sad, like now that you can see the crowd that's there, is like how old they are.
Yeah.
Yep.
You'd want this speech being given to like people much younger than this,
Yeah.
Well, it is kind of that's how it is now, at least. I mean, this maybe not this speeches this professionally, but Twitter is definitely the one speaking to the young, and that does seem to be very right wing, especially lately.
Yeah, I think that's another thing as well. Like, younger people get their political views online.
So maybe he failed in speaking to the pensioners, whereas maybe we won't fail this time because we're speaking to the young.
Well, having this speech up on YouTube means it's probably actually got a lot of young people have probably actually, I don't know how many views this speech has got, but a lot of young people have probably seen this. Right, the actual crowd there are the boomers, but young people would have seen this online. So the message has still been brought out to them that way. I think that's just sort of like a way things will be these days. I mean, like, I have a feeling a lot of young, for Gen Z, a lot of the right-wing Gen Z probably grew up watching people like Count Dankula, Sargon, Carl, Ben Shapiro, people like that. But they would have got these opinions online, not in the pub.
I think that's true, but just on what Raz was saying a second ago about speaking to lots of young people now through social media, I think that's kind of looking at it from like the populist lens, though, which is kind of the opposite of what Bowden is saying here, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're speaking to loads of people, if they aren't organized, doesn't change anything.
Yeah,
You know?
but I'm pretty sure not UKIP, sorry, Reform have the most amount of like followers on like social media, and I mean we can say Reform's like wet, but they are like a group, like they are actually getting things done, even if the things like should have been done months ago. So they are definitely like making progress.
Reform will drag the political conversation rightward over time. I was talking to a panel earlier about how the Reform MPs are basically trying to play like a juggling game, with on the one hand trying to get all the Tories to defect over to Reform, but at the same time also trying to appease their very right-wing nationalistic like membership, who is like wants to pull them more rightward.
I saw Anglo tweet about that. He said that you've basically got two factions in the Reform Party. You've got the wets, like, what's his name? The one I didn't like.
Richard Tice.
Richard Tice, or didn't like him. Yeah, you got the wets of Richard Twice, and then you've got like the actual chads of. I've just woken up, admittedly, so I can't remember anyone's name. What's his name? The one I do like.
Just woke up. It's 1 a.m.
Well, I woke up for the day. Okay, I'm going to be up till 12 tonight. So if anything, I'm fixing my sleep pattern. What's his name? Rupert Law, I think his name is. I like Rupert Law. So he's kind of like balancing these two factions. Now, personally, I would just axe Tice, but for some reason he's keeping them. Presumably, like you said, for the Tories and maybe like the 5 Labour guys that can convince.
Money as well. Tice gives a lot of money to the party.
Yeah, but when Elon comes in, that's not really going to be a thing anymore, is it?
He's
going to get so cooked,
though, isn't it?
Yeah, but Tice is going to get cooked.
Tice is currently trying to like fortify his position, though. That's the thing that I've noticed for like a good couple months now. Tice has been playing this game where he's being like wet, but then he also says something like incredibly base the next day, and he's trying to like play both sides, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like he just needs to go. We have Elon now. He's not needed. He just needs to go. He's holding the back.
I don't think he's holding the party back.
Yeah, he's so wet, and you can so see it's wiping off on Nigel. I mean, Nigel is kind of wet as it is, but it's so clearly wiping off on him. Tice is just a Tory, realistically.
I'm gonna look at Richard Tice's.
But yeah, so my overall point was that like they are like Reform, even if like wet, they are actually. Eternal said the word I'm looking for, but I can't remember what the word was. They are a group and they're doing things, which I suppose is what Jonathan here is calling for.
Hang on a second.
A group and they're doing things.
I couldn't remember what you said.
A vanguard?
They are kind of a vanguard, I guess. Yeah.
I don't know about that. They're too wet for that, man. Even for Araj. As you know, you saw that Twitter spat that I had with somebody else in our sphere the other day.
I did, yes. To be fair, okay, to be fair to him, okay, Nigel did immediately start talking about immigration like 5 seconds later. So I do think. Sure. I mean, he got he put out the bait. She took the bait, and then he got with the trap of immigration. So I'm not entirely opposed to Nigel on.
No, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know why I entered that conversation in good faith, to be fair, because he obviously didn't. But anyway,
that was disappointing to see, admittedly.
Yeah, we'll leave that aside.
Not radical metaphysical views about which many people in this room would argue amongst themselves, but that's not the point. They're the fuel, they're the food, they're the element that keeps people staunch, because it's difficult amongst the withering condescension of a liberal society to maintain elitist identity politics. It's not straightforward. It's not easy. And therefore you need to draw upon certain strengths which are theoretical and which are metaphysical and which are emotional as much as anything else. Because one's tied to one's own group has an emotional core, just as one's tied to one's own regiment. If one's a soldier, has an emotional core. That emotional core is extremely important. The theories are there for the upper part of consciousness and the upper part of the mind. They're also to keep people supple, and to keep people clever, and to keep people alert. Because if there is such a crisis that our people feel they cannot survive, they will turn to not us, but to people like us. They always have, and they always will. The crisis in our own hearts and minds is the addiction of our people to liberal answers whilst they remain in zones of economic comfort. That is the problem. Now, of course, there's all sorts of our people who are not in zones of economic comfort at all. But the problem is that many of them are so degraded by the consequences of life and exist day to day, they have no concern with more general and with more theoretical and with sociological changes. They're concerned with this, this luncheon voucher, this meal tomorrow, this visit to the NHS. They're concerned with what is fundamentally before them at any particular time. The people you always want in a society are the ones who have something to lose, and the ones who are feeling that they're losing it. These enormous middle that extends from the middle of the middle class to the middle of the working class, essentially, the heart of the society. Those are the people who have enough of a stake that they're frightened to lose it. At the moment, they cleave to liberalism because they feel things are not irretrievably and atrociously so bad that they need to call upon elites or vanguards or forms of identity politics to save them. It's our job to keep pushing the message that they need to turn to their more radical proponents in order to be saved. And all that really can be done at this time is to continue to push that message. Organisations will come and go, but ideas...
I mean, that is actually another issue with democracy, actually. I think that's the thing I'd like to mention, is that with democratic system, there's a sort of stasis you have in between elections where things don't really move. So it can be very difficult to sort of preempt a problem, if that makes sense. You sort of get what I mean.
Can you expand on it a bit more?
So, I'm trying to think what's an example I can use. Let's say you're looking at the economy and you're thinking, right, so the current government is on a certain course, right? They're running the economy in X way. This is going to cause an economic collapse. We're going to have like a recession. Unless you get an election, there's nothing you can really do about that. You're just sort of like, oh fuck, like
yeah. Having like one time in 5 years where something can change is kind of not very ideal.
Yeah, there's a lot of like stasis there, and if you have because and the issue with this is because all the parties are going to have ideological positions. So Labour are going to blow up the economy, and they're not going to not blow up the economy because they have ideological commitments that they want to make. And one of those requires them to blow up the economy. If you have a system which is not democratic, you say, like, this is an endorsement of China, but if, say, you have the Chinese system, there's no, like, you can say, like, China might not be the best example here because they're a bunch of communists, but there's no incentive for the CCP to blow up the Chinese economy.
Well, is there not still
I don't think I've made my point very good there, but I'm hoping you're sort of trying to understand the point I'm trying to get at.
Well, I think there is a fundamental issue with democracy in the fact that, you know, every 4 or 5 years you have another election. And so our politicians are basically incentivized to think in like 5-year blocks. And
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm getting at.
a lot of the more deeper, like structural issues just keep getting kicked down the road. For example, the ridiculous amount that we spend on pensions, that has to change at some point. The pension system as it exists now cannot continue forever, but no party wants to be the party to be the one that touches that, because they will be hated for it.
Well, it's a publicity test, really, and doing things that are necessary but unpopular will never happen. Because they'll never, because they're not going to win the next election then. So they're not really competing for who's the best party. They're competing for who's the most popular.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, democracy is just a popularity contest, isn't it?
Yeah, and
it's like Aaron said earlier, before you got here. He was quoting some politician that he spoke to who said, or no, I don't remember. Maybe Charlie said it. I don't remember. But you don't have to be like the best man for the job. You just have to be the best man who's like running for the job.
yeah.
You know? And even that's not true. It's just like you have to be the most like popular man who's running for the job.
And I mean, that just breeds like motivation to lie. There's really not a way you can spin this where it's good.
No. Democracy is, I don't know, for some reason it's been turned into like sort of a deity of its own, but it's very, very flawed.
Something I've noticed as well is that nobody can really explain why it's good. They just sort of like assert that it's good and kind of work backwards from that.
Don't you think it's good that you can choose your leaders, Raz?
Well, there's the liberal assumption that we're all equal, and therefore we deserve an equal decision in, like an equal share in how decisions are made. But we're not all equal, so.
Yeah. But they kind of concede that as well when they don't let like 5-year-olds vote.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know, you'll see things like, oh, you know, if that's your opinion, you shouldn't be allowed to vote and stuff like that.
Yes. So evidently, it's not a case of I get to vote. It's a case of, you know, this will get progressive policies in, and that's what you want.
Well, that's the thing, man. It's like I get so tired of like calling out the hypocrisy of the left, because it's not even really hypocrisy. They're just playing to win, and we should be doing that too. I don't know why we aren't.
Yeah, leftists are very rarely like hypocritical. It's just that most people don't understand what their morals actually are. Like, their morals aren't to improve lives. Their morals aren't like charity or that. Their morals, to quote a great horse enthusiast, their morals are to win as socialists, not lose as socialists.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, it's not hypocrisy. It's just it's a combination of playing the game of politics and I don't even know how to explain it, but yes, they're playing to win, right?
Yeah.
They're playing to win, and they are able to deal with the cognitive dissonance that they surely must be afflicted by. They're somehow like able to deal with that, and just like keep moving despite that. And I don't know why we on the right we have this cognitive dissonance of, yeah, we want to win, but we have to play by the rules though. And it's like, right, but then we lose. So what's the point?
They don't seem to understand that you should treat other people based on how they treat you. Like when the Germans start bombing cities, well, now that's acceptable. We can do that now.
Indeed. Well, it's like when, you know, everyone was mad about that woman losing her job at Home Depot for what was it, saying that Donald Trump should be assassinated or something. It's like,
Yeah.
no, yeah, too right, she should. Like, the left
She'd do the
wouldn't
same
think
to
for
me.
a second. Left wouldn't think for a second about getting someone sacked for saying something like that. Why should we?
You need to have different standards for socialists and like other people on the right, even if like you don't agree with the other people on the right. Because at least with the right, there's a baseline understanding that you're all like you all have morals, like that kind of thing. Like you're not just trying to win, and like there are some
in,
things
in,
that you
in the
wouldn't
words
do.
of Vorsh, principled failure means dog shit.
Yeah,
Well, it's like, this whole woke right thing is just essentially playing to win. Like, their definition of woke seems to be playing to win, right? So, like, James Lindsay, really good at pointing out the problems, really good at pointing out the issues, but don't you dare try to, like, correct them or win, because then you're woke.
that reminds us of someone someone very traditionalist. Well, that reminds me of his arguments back when the Irish were kicking up a fuss.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
We need to protest this, yeah, but don't do it like that. But how should we do it? Well, I don't know.
Just,
Right.
just quietly in your head.
But even then, you'd still get arrested.
Or in his
That's true.
ideal world, yeah. In his ideal world.
Oh, have you not heard the stories of the woman that keeps getting arrested for silently praying outside of an abortion clinic?
Yes, yeah. It's like third time or something. Yeah. Crazy.
She's going for high school. She's trying to rival Tommy Robinson.
Organisations will come and go, but ideas remain, if not eternal, then semi-eternal. And all that we have to do is to keep pushing the message of our own self-belief, of our own form of identity, of our own unique position in history, of our own unique cultural achievements, of the barriers that exist to our own advancement, which are in ourselves. Although individuals could be harmed by other groups, the real cause of harm to ourselves is ourselves. Our own queasiness, our own moderation, our own love of reasonableness, our own love of seeing the other man's point of view. All the political correctness is, in some respects, is a growing out of Protestant/liberal apologetics, that we want to hear the other man's point of view, that we don't wish to be rude, that we don't wish to be unfair, that we don't wish to be insulting. And these things have been erected into a big engine, into a big destructive virus that can be used against us to such a degree now that people fear. People fear opening their own mouths. Everything can be said. Everything can be said, but it can only be said at an abstract and intellectual level. Because if you say things at a more guttural or a more primal or a more unindividuated level, you will be arrested immediately under all of the acts which have been passed. If you
This was the point that he made in the first speech that we looked at, was how the sort of climate has come about where you can only really speak about these issues in an abstract way, because if you try to do it in just like everyday language, you'll get in trouble. And that's been done on purpose to take the power out of it, right? If you can't speak about things properly, then how do you sort of harness that kind of energy and turn it into change?
Well, it's because poor people speak very bluntly, so you can't do that now, and it's totally not to stop poor people from talking about things.
Indeed, and it's and that's a large part of the power of political correctness, or as we now call it, wokeness. Is, I think this is a really important point, and something that isn't talked about enough, is the effect that the power that the left has taken by being able to subvert like language itself.
This has been in their playbook since, well, the 20th century, basically.
Yeah, since like the 60s. Yeah,
I'd go back to the 20s, man.
Maybe, but yeah. So like, if you use their terms, then you're, as Jordan Peterson would say, ceding the linguistic territory to them, and then you've already lost before you started. But if you don't use their terms, then they can paint you as like a bigot or racist or sexist or blah 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 blah. And so I think part of the issue for the right is there are some things that the right is really good at, like memes, for example. But I don't know, and I don't mean that like in the sort of basic sense of like, you know, funny pictures. I mean like ideas, like being able to spread ideas and little phrases that catch on, you know.
Yeah, no, that is definitely something the left just can't do.
No, they're not good at that. But the things that the left are good at are so subversive and so like insidious that they sort of fly under the radar for a lot of people, you know. Like even if you think about the idea of a trans woman, the phrase trans woman, when you think about it, trans is the adjective, woman is the noun. When you use the term trans woman, you're effectively talking about a certain type of woman. But in reality, you're not talking about a certain type of woman, right? You're talking about a certain type of man.
Trans man would be infinitely more just like accurate, but the problem is since they made the term and it's their term that kind of caught on. Now, if you say that, it's just going to cause confusion.
Yeah, no, indeed. And so, but you see, it's like it's such a simple thing. It's such a simple thing, but it's such a subtle trick that even to talk about your opposition to transgenderism or whatever is to sort of legitimize it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very subtle, very insidious, very powerful.
Put things at a high enough level. If you put them at the level of a university right-wing seminar, basically, no one can touch you. No one can touch you on Earth, irrespective of all the laws that have been passed. The only exception will be some of the revisionist legislation in Europe in relation to particular statements, and that applies just to certain European nation states and not others. But broadly speaking, you cannot be touched. But this means you're talking at an abstract level that alienates you even further from the masses, and which is done deliberately for that effect. But also remember that everyone knows that what you're saying. Everyone knows what is being said, because things are digested at different levels, and people absorb things sensually, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, through the hands, through the heart, through the eye, through the fist. They sense it and hear it at different levels. And everybody understands what is being said, even if it's implicit. Ours is an implicit group. The English are in part shy and restrained, and even slightly socially awkward. That's why theatre is so important in our history, because it gives an alternative space to be others, and to be exuberant, and to be passionate, and to be bombastic and virile, things which are not seemingly part of the national characteristic as is. But everyone understands what is being said. Everyone understands what is happening in this society. Everyone understands the transformation which is being wrought. And everyone understands, or almost everyone understands, the choices that may have to be made in the future. It's quite clear that at the present time, people are not going to vote for a Vanguard party, and there isn't one. But that doesn't mean that the Vanguard party shouldn't exist. My view is the Vanguard party should exist and will have to be rebuilt for the moment when such a thing may occur. But the real point is the fact that such a Vanguard exists. Menachem Begin once said that all we needed was 200 men. For Zionism to be established in Palestine, all we needed was 200 men who were prepared to act selflessly in the national and ethnic cause and in a religious cause, although his movement was not an explicitly religious one. You don't need many people. You don't need, when the politics of mass and individual identity come up, an enormous army of people. What you need is those who have the courage and the will to speak at a particular time, and those who keep the mental continuity of that tradition going over time. Because everyone notices what we say, even if it's kept from the masses. Everyone notices what the politics of identity amounts to. Periodically, there's always a programme on the BBC about the far right of some salacious sort. It's always there. It needs to be there. It's a compulsive need. Why does it need to be there? Because liberals need to scratch. They need to find their opposite path. They need to find their other side, their shadow, their darkness. They need to stare into the pit of darkness. That's what they need. They're loved with this sinister other side that they project onto. In Freudian psychoanalysis, there's the idea of projection. Now, let's not get into whether that's a true theory or not, but it's an interesting idea that people who don't like something about themselves project their own nastiness and their own fear and fervour onto others. And that's in some ways what liberals do with people who have, let's call it nationalistic opinions in Western societies. They're a product of a sort of secular demonisation, aren't they, really? Because the elite that speaks for its own group is treated as the secular equivalent of Satanism, virtually. Certainly by many forms of popular media. I mean, that's not an untruthful or particularly biased statement. I think it's just a factual one. Certainly the
Sort of reminds me of what I brought up a bunch of times about what Tom Holland, the historian, not the Spider-Man actor, said about the new sort of political theology post-World War II, in which we no longer ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? We ask, what would Hitler do? And then do the opposite. He's kind of touching on like a similar point there, I think.
Yeah, it's the worst moral system to operate from as well.
Mm.
It's not exclusive
Take
to
abstract
leftists as well.
guy I don't like. What does he like doing? Well, let's do the opposite of that.
Mm.
What?
Because like people on the right do. I feel like that's why we get like a lot of Nazis, like neo Nazis on the right, because they do that and they think, well, hang on, they're doing what he wouldn't do. I'm going to do what he does. I feel like that's where that comes from. So it is a paradigm that both sides are kind of caught in.
I just think it's a stupid way to look at it in general, really. I will not allow my politics to be defined by like Adolf Hitler. No, thank you. You know what I mean?
It seems so ridiculous to say as well.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like, I don't agree with him. Like, generally, I don't agree with him. I'm not a fascist. I have fundamental disagreements with the doctrine of fascism. If I happen to have overlap with him on certain specific issues, then it is what it is. It's not, you know?
It's a controversial take of the century here.
Somehow, yeah. Somehow.
We
Hitler
need a
ate bread.
We need a positive, like, morality, like not the negative
Yes.
one we're working with.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the problem. The political theology, as I say, post World War, is this kind of what we've just laid out, right? And when is that going to change? How is that going to change? What will it look like once it changes? No idea. I assume once the boomers die off, you're already kind of seeing it, man. I mean, like, you're already seeing the sort of shift, right? Just in the fact of how many young people support Hamas over Israel, for example, right? You're already seeing that political theology sort of starting to fray. But, you know, I can't predict where it's going to go, what it will look like, if it will be beneficial for us, right? Raz, you weren't here, but I think one of the biggest takeaways from this speech is just the simple question, is this in our interests? In a given situation, you ask yourself, is this in our interests? And if it's not, then don't do it. No, is this like good for us?
Well,
is this in our interests? If it's not, then don't do it.
If we look at like the Palestine-Israel one, I mean, both sides are kind of ideal for us. I mean, either the merchants go away, or there's less Muslims in the world. Both of them have their benefits. It's entirely dependent on how we react to it.
I think the best reaction would be to say, "Look, nothing to do with me."
Yeah,
Nothing to do
that
with
is
me.
true.
Yeah.
If they want to keep killing each other, then they can keep killing each other. It's not, it's
Right,
not my
but
problem.
then
'Cause-
also
'cause-
there's the idea of, well, hang on, we could be selling weapons here. So
yeah, but the things that I was saying, Charlie, earlier, there was another Bowden speech that he gave where he was saying, you know, we can go out and like bomb these Middle Eastern countries. We probably shouldn't, but like we can, but we can't do that and also import loads of people from those countries. That's ridiculous. That's suicidal. So I think, you know, and obviously you're talking about like selling weapons or whatever. I think it's better to just stay out entirely, and then nobody can blame us. And then we don't have to worry about them coming here and getting all stabby because of like historical grievances. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't benefit us anyway, really. So why would we even bother getting involved?
I think selling weapons to both sides would definitely bring in a profit.
It'd bring
It
in a
would also
profit,
bring in a
but
lot of extremists.
yeah,
but that's why you close your
bring in-
borders. Like,
it'd bring in a profit, but is it moral? Is it actually in our interests, like long term? You know, I don't know, but I think it's a very good question. One of the biggest takeaways from this speech, I think, is it in our interests? Such an important question.
The level of propaganda is a factual one. At the level of academic reporting, it's not, and a more realistic view is taken. But at the level of tabloid media and general media, the demonisation is very strong. And the demonisation has worked. The demonisation has worked, which is why people will not vote in enormous numbers for parties of extraordinary reasonableness. All of the populist parties have fallen over themselves to be as moderate and as acclimatising as possible in this era. They've given away almost 70% of the core ultra views that.
We're seeing that today. Do you hear what he said there? Populist parties are falling over themselves to run to the centre. Seeing that today.
yeah, which never really makes sense to me because then, well, you're not really populist anymore, are you?
I mean, I understand why they do it, right? Is so that they can appeal to the widest, like broadest possible base, obviously, but it's not good enough.
But that's not in the centre. That's to the right.
What's to the right?
The majority of people are to the right. So, but you're going to the left, but
right, yeah.
you're leaving the population.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think part of the problem, like in Britain, is that most people, even if they are technically on the right, you know, at heart they're liberals, right? So, so of course they will immediately and instinctively reject anything which is outside of the liberal paradigm, which has, you know, been set up for us. And our solutions do not lie within the liberal paradigm. They lie outside of it. They lie beyond it. But then how do we reconcile these two facts? How do we make that work in our interests? These are the issues.
If liberalism was forced upon the people, you can force something else upon them.
True. True. Very true. Well, I mean, I think that will happen anyway.
Well, it has to, as a matter of
cracks
course.
are showing. The cracks are showing in liberalism. We just have to paraphrase a 20th century guy. We just have to, what is it, kick in the door and the whole rotting structure will collapse.
Yeah.
And it did. To be fair, he was right.
Yeah.
Manifest in this particular areas, and yet still people will not vote for them in a majority way. And that is because the demonisation, together with the apathy and the attendant liberalism, have all worked. But demonisation has a point of crescendo. Demonisation builds and builds and builds until it gets so out of kilter with reality that people shrug it aside, as if it's of no importance. And then it can be a form of virility, and it can be a form of power, and it can be a form of importance. In Northern Ireland at the moment, the Catholic group is proud to vote for Sinn Féin. Almost everybody. The moderate nationalist party, nationalist in the context of that particular society, don't forget, is dying. The SDLP is an elderly party of trade union activists, which is dying. And there is a degree to which we have to understand that in our politics, all is open and anything can happen. And the future is ours if we want it to be. And that the point of the elitist view that I'm putting forward is that the absence of despair is always necessary for our way of thinking and our way of looking at things. I ask you not to despair. I ask you to look to the future as to the present and to the past. I ask you to remain faith with vanguardistic and elitist views. I ask you to remain faithful to unpopular views at the present time, because they will become majority views instantaneously at a particular moment if the society should ever break and turn our way. All that we've done is to sustain ideas. One man alone in a room with a computer, a typewriter as was, can change the world. A few people alone in a room, if they cleave to an idea whose time has come, can still change the world. There are more of us than ever before. Our people are probably dumbed down to an incredible degree, but more are capable of being better educated than ever before. We're stronger and fitter than ever before. In the Boer War, when the slums of England were opened, 2/3 of those that came forward were raddled with rickets and with disease and couldn't fight, and wouldn't fight because they physically couldn't fight. Churchill once said, "What's use having an empire if you can't flush your own toilet?" One of his rare radical social statements. And there's a degree of truth in all of that. So I would ask the people in this room to understand that they're part of a tradition of non-surrender, a tradition of ultimate resource, a tradition that never says die, a tradition that's the epitome of military life, but in another area, theoretically and politically and actuarially. One can never take one's identity from one. One exists for a purpose. Liberals believe life has no purpose. But life has a purpose, and life's purpose is to go forward and to confront that which is before you. And what is before us is cultural dispossession, unless we're prepared to do something about it. What we can do about it will depend upon the circumstances. But what we can do is to remain loyal to our own sense of identity, to our own sense of becoming, to our own sense of what we may be in the future. Most people are truly afraid. They are afraid to open their own mouths in relation to any of these issues. We must not be. We must understand that that degree of fear needs to be conquered in ourselves, as it will be conquered in others. Only when the time comes will we be looked to if we remain loyal to our vision of ourselves. We know who we are. We don't know yet where we are going, but we will always exist. And we must always maximize the maximum potential of our existence. There's a book on the side of this room called March of the Titans, which in its way hopes to adumbrate all that we have achieved. Our quadrant of mankind has achieved an enormous amount through elite individuals who replicate back onto the majority the success of their own group in architecture, in law, in art, in scholasticism, in morals, in economics, in military affairs, in technology, elsewhere. But also in political leadership, also in military courage, also in vanguardism and elitism. The present political class has betrayed us. But that doesn't mean that political classes can be done away with. It just means they need to be replaced with people who are better and stronger and more willful and more in tune with the internal vibrations and sense of solemnity of their own group. I ask you to put your hands together for Britain, for Europe, for Indo-European civilization, for our notion of ourselves, and for an undying and unquenchable fire that can never be put out because it never knows what it is to be extinguished. Thank you very much.
So that was that. What did we think?
That's just a good speech.
7,000 views.
Not sure.
Not bad.
I googled it, and that wasn't the only upload of this.
Ah, okay, yeah.
There's also that Churchill quote. What do you mean by that? Was that something like racist against Indians, or did I misunderstand?
What's the use of an empire if you can't flush your own toilet? I think it was a point about like poverty. You know, we have this massive empire, yet we have people who like do not have toilets, that sort of thing. I'm not sure.
Ah, right. So while we are powerful, we are living in poverty, and there's not much point in the power if we can't just stop that.
For example, my mum grew up in a house without an indoor toilet. They had they had to walk down the garden. Crazy.
When was
she's not like that old, really. Well, she grew up in the 70s.
Damn.
Yeah. Crazy.
I mean, I hear things like that, and like, I just think like the world isn't like so modern as you think it is.
No, not at all. It's all a facade, man. It's all a facade, like a bourgeois facade. Like, this is one of the things that, you know, people like traditionalist outlook think that things will just continue as they are and will just always progress and always improve and nothing will ever get worse. No.
Things can always get worse.
Absolutely. I mean, just like to take the most like basic bitch example, just look at the collapse of the Roman Empire, right? And then we entered, you know, the quote unquote Dark Ages. That was a whatever the opposite word of improvement is. Yeah.
English. Societal decline across Europe.
Yeah.
Like significantly. I mean, in Britain, we went from having like structurally sound stone houses to fucking like wood that would blow over in the winter. Like like
I think like even from just like more of a modern example, like how do they explain Iran? Like how do they explain what happened there?
That's true. Well, there's a story I heard about Germans, like Germanic peoples in like Germania, would look up at the aqueducts that the Romans had built, and they thought that they must have been built by giants, because how could any humans build those? You know?
Yeah, they live in a period a century or two after the fall of the empire. They have no sort of like reference to go like, well, how could this even exist?
No, but yeah, Iran is
obviously
also a
Germans
good
living
idea.
contemporary to the Roman Empire. They could completely understand that. They would have known the force and the power that the Roman Empire had, the pool of resources that it could draw upon to do something like that. But if you're living in the Dark Ages, you're just wandering through the woods and you're coming across giant Roman ruins, and you're just like, well, how the fuck is anyone building that? They have no reference for something like that.
Yeah. And so they, apparently just assumed that there must have been giants who lived here once and who did this. But Iran is also a very good example. Yeah, that's a very good point. I think this is why progressives are so deathly afraid of any sort of reversal of any of their policies. Is because it completely destroys their worldview that things can only get better, as Tony Blair put it.
I mean, Persia would pride itself on being like incredibly like let's say progressive. I don't know if that's the word they'd use, but Persia used to be a very like it sort of yeah, it would be a very progressive place before the Muslims.
Yeah, you can see pictures like that. I mean, that's how like recent it was. Obviously, it was like 74 or so. You can see pictures from like the 70s in Iran, and they just look like totally normal. You know, just totally normal people, just like teenagers, like hanging out and stuff. You know, and now it's
same
like,
in Lebanon.
If you compared
immeasurably
Iran
different.
of the 70s to some of its neighbors, like let's say Afghanistan, you could understand why they would take a sense of pride in that.
Yeah,
it's a civilized nation in this sea of not say something. Yeah.
Yeah, like I say, I think that's why progressives are so terrified of any reversal. That's why Roe v. Wade, like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, was like an existential crisis for some leftists. Because any reversal of the things that they have fought for previously, any of their sort of prior victories, is like an existential threat to their worldview and their sort of philosophy of history.
It teaches them as well that their victories are not set in stone.
No, and that's something of a white pill for us is their victories are not set in stone. They can be reversed, and I think as we enter the sort of post-liberal world, we can work on reversing those.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the future and where the right is sort of heading, the left is going to start running out of positions in which to attack the right, other than just saying you're a bunch of far right, evil, mecha Hitlers.
Like they have sort of painted themselves into a corner. Yeah. Because there's no substance to the attack, right? It's purely, it's literally insults.
I mean, at this point, the right has just embraced it anyway.
I mean, yeah, that's true. I've actually seen those memes, you know, where it's like, "Oh, you're a racist." No, I'm not. You're a racist. What's the second response? It's like, yeah, you're a racist. No, I'm not. You're a racist. I don't care. You're a racist. Thanks for noticing. You know. The issue
I was more specifically thinking of the term far right. Like I'm not like racist or anything like that, but like far right. I mean, that's so broad that I just sort of take it. I'm just like, yeah, okay, sure. I guess I'm far right, whatever that means.
Yeah, indeed.
That one's interesting as well, because like everything good they've just labeled as far right, which has completely nuked their point.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's like I say, there's no sort of substance to most of their attacks now. One thing that is an issue is how successful their project of deconstruction has been, and how difficult it will be to sort of rebuild a lot of the sort of things that right wingers kind of hold dear, like traditional things. I mean, I guess there's a sort of postmodern aspect to it where we can say, look, it doesn't have to be objectively true. It doesn't even really have to make sense. It's just mine and I like it, and I'm not going to let you take it away from me, sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, like I say, they've deconstructed so much of our culture. How much of it is truly recoverable, you know?
You don't have to explain your culture to people that hate it inherently.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no reason to like even entertain them at the end of the day.
No, you actually sort of legitimize the attack when you sort of try to defend it. Yeah.
They're not like it's not a case of like they genuinely don't know. They know what it is. They know what it is. So it's not coming from a place of not knowing and curiosity. It's coming from a place of a desire to bastardize it.
Indeed. Anyway, yes. So that was that. That was Jonathan Bowden's Hope for the Future / Vanguardism. I want to thank Charlie and Mega Hitler for being here today. It's been a good one. It's been a good one. Charlie, any final words?
I actually found that a bit white pilling, to be honest. But then I'm always a hopeless optimist, so. Well, the speech, to be honest, how to put this? I mean, he's listing off a bunch of things that's going terribly, but like at the same time, I'm just sitting there and thinking, like, yeah, but things feel like they're being pushed in the right direction now. At least very slowly, but at least there's at least movement.
Yeah, because I think my sort of general like black-pilledness comes from the fact that I feel like it's happening too slowly and we're running out of time. But it is definitely going in the right direction. Yeah, definitely.
I think it's. I think we have more time than a lot of people realize. Maybe there's no way for me to like qualify that. I can't make a factual statement on that, but I feel as if there's
source.
I'm a bit like Destiny. I'm a bit like Destiny. I'm a bit like Destiny during the US election. I'm going off vibes.
Yeah. So, Mega Hitler. Any last words?
Yeah, there was 2, maybe 3. So first of all, you've been actually like Doomer posting on Twitter. Is this entire stream just to try and counter that?
Yeah, I don't know. My mood fluctuates like based on what my feed gives me. I'm a slave to the Twitter feed. Send help. No, I try to view it as realism, right? I try to view it as realism, right? I don't know if it's doomerism. Like I was saying that nothing will change and stuff, right? I assume that's what you're referring to. And I think that's a factual statement, right? Unless somebody comes along and makes things change, then yeah, nothing will change.
That is true. That is true. Also, when you say like things are moving too slowly, I would agree. But when you start driving a car, you do start slowly, and it does increase the further you go in speed. So it's probably just that. Like we're just getting started, and as things go, it'll get quicker and quicker. That tends to be the case for lots of things. Technology being a big one. The longer things go, and the longer technology is allowed to develop undisturbed, it does sort of accelerate in the rate of which it accelerates. So I'd imagine it very much be the same thing.
Exponential growth.
Yeah. Project 2025, lads. We're just getting started.
Yeah, I just mean, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I guess you're right. And like I say, things are going in the right direction. Long may it continue. Hopefully, momentum will pick up, as you say. When I say about running out of time, I just mean in terms of how many more kids have to die, how much more of our culture has to be deconstructed. What does the demographic situation look like 10 years from now? These sort of things. But
I think at this
there
point,
is hope.
Just have to take it on the chin.
Yeah, there is hope.
Realistically, there's not much else you can do. We just got to keep fighting.
Yeah, indeed. Right, and on that note, thank you very much, Charlie, for joining. Thank you very much, Mega Hitler, for joining. And thank you very much to you at home for listening and watching along with us. I hope you will like, share, leave a comment, subscribe, Rumble, Instagram, Twitter, etc. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
We love Mega